Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Abby Hernandez. It was a normal fall day in the small town of Conway, New Hampshire. The trees were in full bloom, with bright reds and yellows, and a cool breeze filled the air. Life went on as usual, with students rushing to class and parents going about their daily business. For Abby Hernandez, it was just like any other day. She quickly woke up, packed her things, put on her new shoes, and headed to school. She was energetic, smart, and friendly. Her classmates often commented that everything was more fun when she was around. Abby loved nature and enjoyed hiking. No one could have guessed that these hikes would lead to a nightmare that would change her life forever. That night, Abby didn't come home, and the whole town was in chaos. Wondering how such a cheerful and responsible girl could have disappeared, Abby's story illustrates the dangers of trusting someone who initially seems nice. Abby just wanted help getting home, but ended up in a dangerous situation. Born on October 12, 1998, Abby was the youngest of two daughters in her family. Xenia Hernandez, Abby's mother, worked as a nurse at a local hospital, while her father was a salesman. Overall, Abby's family was happy and well off. However, during Abby's high school years, her parents decided to divorce. Shortly after the divorce, her father remarried and started a new family, leaving Abby and her sister to live with their mother. Although Abby's father continued to provide financial support, his relationship with his daughters was limited to brief greetings. From a young age, Abby had many friends and frequently changed her interests. Eager to explore new ones, she participated in sports, enjoyed drawing and photography, read a lot, and learned foreign languages easily. At the age of 12, Abby joined a local outdoor club where she enjoyed hiking and climbing. She also learned outdoor survival skills that she applied in her adventures. In early October 2013, Abby was preparing for her school holidays and her birthday. She planned to go hiking with her outdoor club and had received a new pair of hiking boots. However, the shoes were a bit tight, so Abby decided to go to school to get used to it. On October 9, the girl went to school as usual and promised her mother that she wouldn't come home late. By 5 p.m., her mother, Xenia, was starting to worry because Abby still hadn't come home, and her phone was dead. After a few hours, without seeing Abby, Xenia decided to find out where she could be. Abby had left school immediately after classes, saying goodbye to her friends at the bus stop and choosing to walk home since no one had seen Abby after school. Xenia and her older daughter reported her missing to the police. A search began immediately. The police acted quickly, starting by interviewing anyone who might have seen Abby that day, including her friends, teachers, and neighbors. They confirmed that Abby had last been seen around 4 p.m. as she left the school grounds to walk home through the park, a route she took almost every day. The route was familiar to both her and her family. Police began searching the park that Abby had passed on her way home. Local volunteers and members of her club scoured the forested and scrubby trails, but found no signs or clues. Abby's phone was turned off, and no signal was recorded from it. Over the next few days, police focused on tracing her possible route. They requested footage from the surveillance cameras at nearby intersections and in the park. One of the parking lot cameras captured Abby. She was wearing a school uniform and new shoes, walking calmly down the sidewalk without looking back. A few minutes after the recording, a dark-colored car entered the camera's view, seemingly headed toward her. This discovery became the first lead in the investigation. Police began checking for cars matching the description that had been in the park area that day. Unfortunately, they were unable to find any matches. Abby's story quickly became headline news on local television stations. The family recorded a distress call, and Xenia publicly urged the kidnapper to bring her daughter home. A week passed, and the chances of finding Abby alive decreased. Locals continued to search, but with no new leads. The investigation was put on hold. Despite this, the family remained hopeful. Abby's classmates and friends organized an event at school. They attached her photo to their backpacks and shared information about her disappearance on social media. Meanwhile, police noted that Abby's phone had been turned off shortly after she went missing, suggesting that the kidnapper may have intentionally turned off the tracking feature. Indicating that the abduction was premeditated, police also looked into Abby's family history. Although her parents had divorced years ago, they questioned all family members, including Abby's father. In cases like this, every possibility is considered, but her father had an alibi. He was in another city at the time of Abby's disappearance, so he was eliminated as a suspect on October 15. 6 days after Abby went missing, police received an unexpected call from a resident in the nearby area. He reported seeing a dark-colored car, similar to the one captured on security cameras, parked in an abandoned lot next to an old warehouse. The task force quickly went to investigate, but when they arrived, the car was gone, however. They did find a piece of plastic that may have fallen from the bumper in the tall grass. Along with tire tracks, this evidence prompted the police to continue searching for the car. Meanwhile, Abby is locked in a room. She is tied up. Her kidnapper, a man in his 30s with long, unkempt hair, introduces himself as Nathaniel. He says he won't hurt her as long as she obeys him, but his behavior becomes increasingly erratic. Abby soon realizes that her kidnapping is part of a carefully planned plot. Despite her fear, she focuses on staying calm and recalls her survival training. She pays close attention to her surroundings, the layout of the room, and how often her kidnapper appears. She takes note of anything that could help her escape or provide information to her rescuers. Abby quickly realizes that her kidnapper is mentally unstable. He can be friendly at times, even bringing her food, but he also threatens her. If she asks too many questions, Nathaniel does not explain why she was kidnapped, but makes it clear that she will be there for a long time. Abby tries to keep her composure to avoid provoking him. The basement is dark and nearly empty, creating a stuffy atmosphere. She can smell dampness and dust, and the only sound is the echo of her captor's footsteps. Nathaniel frequently checks her bindings to make sure she cannot escape. However, Abby notices that he has tied them too loosely when he leaves the room. She begins to shake the chair in an attempt to loosen the ropes. She almost succeeds, but Nathaniel returns just in time. He warns her not to try again, or she will suffer the consequences. After that, he begins to watch her more closely. Meanwhile, the police continued to search for the car, analyzing the footage. They determined the make of the car by examining tire tracks and some plastic debris left in the parking lot. They identified the car they were looking for and began checking with owners of similar cars in the area, as well as anyone who might have been seen at the time of Abby's disappearance. Another witness provided vital information, reporting that they had seen a man near an old warehouse. The man appeared to be acting suspiciously, looking around and trying to avoid attracting attention. The police sent a team to investigate the warehouse. When they arrived, they found that the building appeared to be abandoned, but noticed a small light coming from one of the windows. After examining the premises from the outside, they discovered footprints leading to the back door. A task force was called in to conduct a thorough search of the building. The task force moved in with stun grenades to disorient the kidnapper. Nathaniel attempted to escape, but was quickly apprehended. He resisted, shouting threats and claiming that he was innocent. Abby was initially confused and frightened by the noise, but her fear turned to relief when the door opened and she saw the police. They freed her from her chains and wrapped her in a blanket to help her feel warm and safe. The rescuers reassured her that she was safe and that her mother was waiting for her. After several days of captivity, she was finally rescued and taken to the hospital for evaluation. Although she felt mentally exhausted, she was in relatively good physical health. Medical professionals, including doctors and psychologists, worked with her to help her recover from the traumatic experience. Nathaniel Kibbe was arrested and charged with kidnapping. The investigation revealed that he had been following Abby and paying attention to her habits. Nathaniel had no permanent home, moved frequently, and had a history of minor crimes. Evidence found in his car and in a shed linked him to the kidnapping, including Abby's personal belongings. After her rescue, Abby faced many challenges. While she returned to normal life, she became more withdrawn, and it took her a long time to feel safe again. With the support of loved ones and professionals, she began to heal and even shared her story to help warn others. Abby's experience was more than just the kidnapping. It showed her incredible strength, her ability to stay calm, observe her surroundings, and seek help was crucial to her survival in extremely harsh conditions. This story serves as a reminder of the importance of being cautious, trusting your instincts, and persevering even in the most desperate times. After her release, Abby faced a long and challenging recovery process. Although she was back with her family, her life was forever changed. Initially, she avoided walking alone, stayed away from crowds, and regularly checked her windows and doors before going to bed. Gradually, she began to feel safer and started to rebuild her life. Abby was determined not to let fear control her life. She chose to use her experiences to help others. She began speaking at school assemblies and community events, emphasizing the importance of always being mindful and prioritizing personal safety. Her story resonated with many, inspiring other trauma survivors. Her kidnapper, Nathaniel Kibbe, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term. During the trial, Abby took the stand and expressed her thoughts. Her words symbolized her resilience and marked her victory over the terrible fear he had tried to instill in her. Years later, Abby discovered her passion for working with organizations that support children and young people. She played a key role in creating safety programs to ensure that others would not have to face the same situation she endured. Her determination and strength helped her regain her joy in life, despite the traumatic experiences she faced. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Sheila Vaughn Wees. Sheila Vaughn Wees was born into a loving and respectful family. However, as she grew older, she struggled to instill these values in her daughter, who became stubborn and disobedient, eventually leading to tragedy. On June 10, 1952, Neil Wees and Liz Lenore Allen welcomed their daughter, Sheila. Neil was a World War I veteran who had served in the United States Air Force, and Liz worked as an accountant. The couple had 3 children, Sheila, Bill, and Deborah, and they lived in Minneapolis. Sheila did very well in school and was an excellent student. She then went to Boston University, graduating with a master's degree in political science. After graduation, she worked at a publishing house, where she interacted with several famous people. One day, Sheila met James Mack, a well-known conductor, composer, producer, and arranger in the music industry. At that time, James had children from a previous marriage. But this did not stop him from starting a romantic relationship with Sheila. Their relationship quickly advanced, and they soon got married. After the wedding, the couple moved to a small town in the district of Foran. There, they got involved in community activities and even organized performances in their backyard. In October 1995, her daughter Lois Heather Mack was born. At 43, Sheila was overjoyed to welcome a healthy baby girl. She and her husband, James, showered Lois with love and enrolled her in a top preschool and school. However, some relatives felt that Sheila spoiled her daughter. In 2001, Sheila and James planned a vacation and bought tickets for a Mediterranean cruise, they taking Lois along. Sadly, during the trip, James suffered a serious leg injury that was not properly treated, resulting in partial paralysis. The family later filed a lawsuit against the cruise company for damages, but the legal process took more than 9 years to resolve. On July 20, 2006, the family went on a trip to Athens, where James later died in their hotel room. His death was recorded on August 6, 2006. After his death, James Max's will was revealed, stating that his daughter Lois, Heather, would inherit $1.5 million. The relationship between Sheila and Lois was strained. Lois often displayed disruptive behavior, throwing tantrums, and even attacking her mother. Since 2008, police reports have documented 35 incidents of domestic violence in Sheila's household. Additionally, Lois often ran away from home, prompting Sheila to file a missing persons report. Friends of Sheila's have reported that she sought help from various psychologists to deal with the situation. During this challenging period, Lois was a middle school student at Oak Park and River Forest School, where her talent for dancing started to show. She generally behaved well in school, but discussions about her relationship with her mother would often lead to her becoming upset. At that time, she was dating a boy named Tommy Schaefer, who was 2 years older than her. Tommy had a history of legal issues due to minor offenses. Tommy had many friends. He was especially close to his cousin Robert Bibbs. In 2011, Sheila's family's lawsuit after James injured his leg on a cruise was settled, resulting in a court judgment awarding her family $340,000 in damages. Since James had died, the money was supposed to go to Lois as stated in his will. However, for reasons that are unclear, the judge ordered the money to be sent to Sheila, which increased the conflict between Lois and Sheila. Her resentment towards her mother grew, and she made numerous threats against Sheila. By 2013, Sheila, concerned for her safety, hired a private investigator because Lois had begun to stalk her, closely monitoring her routes, schedules, and daily routines. There was animosity between them, which made their trip to the Greek coast seem unusual. However, nothing catastrophic happened during that time. In 2014, Tommy and Lois began seeing each other more frequently. Despite Sheila's objections, the situation escalated when Lois stole Sheila's bank card at a hotel party and spent over $1,000. Her mother threatened to report Lois to the police, blaming her for many problems, including the death of her father James. Tensions rose, leading Lois and Tommy to consider a drastic solution to their problems, as Sheila was seen as an obstacle to accessing the family's finances. Despite their strained relationship, Sheila and Lois traveled to Bali together in August 2014. The mother hopes that during her 10 days here, her daughter will reconsider her feelings and stop resenting her. They stayed at the St. Regis Hotel in Bali. On the day they arrived in Bali, Lois texted Tommy, confirming that everything was going according to plan. She then stole her mother's credit card again and bought a $12,000 ticket for Tommy. He arrived on the island just 12 hours later. Meanwhile, Lois was arguing with her mother at the hotel, this time about the news of her pregnancy. Tommy then went to the hotel where Sheila and Lois were staying and got involved in the fight. He hit Sheila in the face with a metal crowbar, killing her instantly. Tommy told his cousin Robert what had happened. Lois and Tommy then put Sheila's body in a suitcase and asked a porter to leave it in the hotel lobby while they called a taxi. The taxi arrived within 10 minutes and they quickly loaded the suitcase containing Sheila's body into the trunk to leave Bali as soon as possible. However, Sheila had previously warned the hotel staff not to accept any payments made with her card without her presence, knowing that Lois often stole her cards. As a result, Lois had no money and the couple were unable to pay for their hotel room. They fled without paying the bill, leaving their passports in the hotel safe. Without these documents, they cannot go to the airport. Lois and Tommy asked the taxi driver to stop at a budget hotel called Rita Valley, which they had just passed. They left their suitcases in the taxi and asked the driver to wait 10 to 15 minutes while they checked in. However, 2 hours had passed, and the driver became impatient and went into the hotel himself, but found their room empty. Lois and Tommy had checked in there but had quickly fled. Frustrated, the taxi driver returned to his car and noticed that the suitcase was leaking a red liquid. Suspecting foul play, he called the police. When the police arrived and opened the suitcase, they discovered Sheila's body inside. Forensic experts later concluded that she had died from facial fractures that had blocked her airway. In addition, her fingers were broken and her body was covered in bruises. The heartbreaking news of Sheila's death reached her family, prompting her sister, Deborah, to begin searching online for information about the case. All she found was a photograph of a suitcase. As details of the murder were reported in the media, public interest grew. Staff at the Rita Suitcase Hotel informed police that a young couple had checked in that night without luggage. When hotel staff asked them to provide their full names for internet use, they complied, knowing that this was required. The police were quick to obtain the couple's information. Police began to go to the room the couple was staying in. Hotel staff said the room had been searched and was empty. However, the couple had secretly returned to the room because they had nowhere else to go and were exhausted. They were sleeping when police found them. Lois and Tommy were taken to the police station for questioning. They gave conflicting stories about being attacked by a gang at the St. Regis Hotel and claimed that the robbers had killed Sheila. While the couple's testimony was inconsistent, the hotel staff and taxi driver remained consistent in their tests. As a result, Lois and Tommy were arrested for murder. Lois became angry, shouting that she was innocent and demanding a lawyer from the United States. The couple appeared on public television in Indonesia, with the report filmed from the police station. Tommy covered his face with a t-shirt, while Lois smiled and smoked a cigarette. They were then transferred to Lesenpar Prison, which houses serious criminals and murderers. Sheila's body was returned home for burial. Her case attracted international attention. During the proceedings, Lois underwent several psychological evaluations, but the results were not considered in the verdict. As the investigation progressed, police discovered more details about the case and the media reported that Lois was pregnant. Then on March 17, 2015, a baby girl named Stella was born. The police allowed Lois to see her baby, but only within the confines of the prison. The baby was healthy, but had an extra finger on his left hand that required surgery to remove. At the hearing, Tommy cried as he claimed that he was defending himself against an aggressive Sheila. He said that she attacked him when she found out about Lois's pregnancy. He also said that Lois often expressed a desire to escape her difficult mother. Lois' testimony contradicted Tommy's. She said she never wanted her mother to die. During the violent fight, she even ran into the bathroom to save her mother. But her testimony was not believed. The judge was presented with evidence that showed Lois and Tommy's criminal intent. Lois had previously suggested that Tommy hire a hitman to kill Sheila and had prepared $40,000 for the purpose. Sheila's autopsy showed obvious injuries and bruises on her hands and face, indicating that Sheila had fought back in self-defense. As a result, Lois Heather Mack and Tommy Schaefer were convicted of premeditated murder. Under Indonesian law, they faced the death penalty. However, the court pardoned them. This leniency was largely due to their newborn child and the couple's deep remorse. Tommy realized the severity of his actions. Sheila's family later visited him in prison, talked to him, and expressed their grief. This interaction caused Tommy to fall into a depression. He began to hate himself and truly regret his choices. His mental state deteriorated, leading to health problems, causing him to lose 11 kilograms and look pale. In April 2015, the final court hearing concluded, and the judge announced the verdict. Lois Heather Mack was sentenced to 10 years in prison, while Tommy Schaefer received an 18-year term. The prosecution described them as ruthless criminals. However, Tommy's good behavior and expressed remorse helped him avoid a longer sentence. As they left the courtroom, Lois posed for photographers from various newspapers and, while drinking a soda that smelled of alcohol, smiled and made jokes. The only thing that troubled her was the fact that she would be released much earlier than Tommy. Meanwhile, Tommy looked at her with anger and wanted nothing to do with her, marking the end of their relationship. Lois, who avoided the death penalty and received a shorter sentence, acted provocatively in prison. She frequently took photos and videos with her friends in prison, enjoying their time together. She managed to get alcohol to drink. To earn money to buy alcohol, she sold food in the prison yard. The prison authorities allowed her to sell food, feeling sorry for her because she was a single mother, but they saw that she did not care much for her daughter, who spent her early years in terrible conditions. Tommy considered Lois a fallen person and mentally ill. One day, reporters secretly entered the prison and recorded footage of Lois having fun and dancing with friends in her cell. The footage quickly went viral on television and online, causing considerable public outrage. In response, Tommy filed a petition with the United States government, requesting that Lois be transferred from the Indonesian prison to a psychiatric hospital in the United States. In the petition, he expressed that he was not seeking sympathy but hoped that their daughter would grow up to be a good person. A year later, Tommy wrote a letter to his friends detailing how Sheila's murder was planned and carried out, and Lois's questionable actions in front of their young daughter Stella. Lois seemed to be focused only on her own gain, with no regard for Stella. The responsibility of looking after Lois' daughter Stella was eventually given to a fellow prisoner, Ashar Putra Melody Sert, who had been released. Ashar quickly adapted to life in Indonesia and married a wealthy local man. Stella was then placed in the care of the couple. The police identified Robert's involvement in Sheila's murder, leading to his quick arrest and trial in 2017. He pleaded guilty to breaking the law and being an accessory to Sheila's murder. During the trial, he revealed that in August 2014, Tommy had come to him for advice on how to carry out a murder. As a result, Robert received a 9-year prison sentence. Sheila's family was pleased with the outcome. While in prison, Lois ended her relationship with Tommy. In October 2021, Lois completed 7 years in an Indonesian prison and was paroled. Her reunion with her 6-year-old daughter, Stella, was a moment of liberation for her. Stella lived in Indonesia for another month before being extradited to the United States with her mother. At that point, her daughter no longer needed a guardian. Upon arriving in Chicago, Lois was arrested at the airport by FBI agents. She faced new charges of conspiracy to murder a U.S. citizen abroad and obstruction of justice. Lois attempted to draw media attention to her arrest, believing it was unfair, especially since she had already served time in Indonesia. She felt it was unfair that the police had brought new charges against her. At her first court appearance in the United States, Lois denied all charges against her. Her attorney, Keith Vogel-Barova, argued for her to be released on bail. In response, District Judge Charnel agreed to consider the appeal and heard from Assistant District Attorney Terry Keeney. The court needed a reasonable amount of time to make a decision. A week later, Lois reached a plea deal with police and pleaded guilty to conspiracy to murder a U.S. citizen abroad. A hearing then took place in Illinois Federal Court. District Judge Matthew Kelly considered the prosecution's recommendation for a 28-year prison sentence, minus 7 years for time served in Indonesia. The judge then sentenced Lois Heather Mack to 26 years in prison, ordered her to pay $2,278 in restitution, and fined her $50,000. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Sisette Abigail. Sisette Abigail was born in 1996 in Mexico. At 21, she met Luis Alfonso Alvarez Lopez, a 31-year-old man, also from Mexico. They eventually decided to live together in an apartment located in Building 27 on Paseo de la Reforma, in Colonia Tabacalera, Cuauhtémoc District, Mexico City, where Luis worked as the building administrator. Luis is a con artist, especially targeting women. He used deception to manipulate women into giving him money. While some considered him attractive, his true skill lay in his ability to manipulate others. He often fabricated tragic stories about his family to gain sympathy and achieve his goals. In one case, he swindled about $6,000 from a young woman by claiming his brother had been kidnapped by a group. In another instance, he convinced a girlfriend that he wanted to marry her and asked for money to buy an apartment where they would live together. However, he never purchased the apartment, disappeared with her savings, and the wedding never occurred despite her having an engagement ring. Luis pulled off one of the most daring scams by faking his own death 3 times, earning him the nickname the Lord of Swindles. These incidents took place in 2016. The first incident occurred on May 19th, when he circulated his photo, shows that he was one of the victims of the Egyptair Flight 804 crash. The second fake death happened on June 12th, during the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, Florida. The third incident occurred on June 28th, when another social media user shared his photo, claiming he was their brother, who had gone missing after the Istanbul airport attack in Turkey. Following these incidents, Luis' image went viral on social media and was picked up by international media. Days after Luis' third fake death, French media began investigating the situation. They were curious about how the same photo appeared in 3 separate tragedies and whether Luis himself was behind the posts or if someone else was responsible. It was revealed that Luis did not post his photo online. Instead, individuals to whom he owed money shared it. These people accused him of being a fraud and tried to ruin his reputation, they portraying him as a liar. French media contacted some of them, and one explained how Luis had manipulated others. On May 19th, when the Egyptair plane disappeared into the sea, a user on a social network shared Luis' photo, claiming it was their brother, Luis, who had been on the plane. This misinformation somehow reached the BBC. The BBC later published this information. However, the following day, after verifying the passenger list and realizing the error, the BBC retracted the story. One victim of Luis said she sued him for fraud, but she never got her money back. Frustrated, she decided to post his photo online so that everyone would recognize him as a scammer. Concerning the nightclub attack in Orlando, a reputable newspaper edited a video to show Luis as one of the victims. The newspaper also reported that the incident may have been an attempt to frame him. A French TV station managed to interview Luis, giving him a chance to defend himself. During the interview, he admitted that he had unresolved fraud cases in Mexico. However, he explained that he had not filed complaints against those who shared his photo because news in Mexico was of little importance to him and did not affect him. Through these incidents, Luis managed to win over Sisette, just as he had charmed other women. He persuaded her to move in with him. She was very happy because this was the first time she lived with a man, and she believed he would become her lifelong partner. However, things did not go as she had hoped. Initially, everything seemed fine, but over time, Luis revealed his controlling behavior. He prohibited she from having friends and prevented her from contacting her family or colleagues. He forbade her from working and essentially kept her confined at home. Her only role was to assist him with some administrative tasks related to the building. Beyond that, she had no interaction with anyone else. This isolation led to frequent arguments. Over time, the situation got worse, and Luis abused her. The tragedy began on Friday, September 18, 2020. Sisette spoke to her parents for the last time, promising to join them for lunch on Sunday, September 20th. However, she never showed up. She stopped responding to calls or messages, which deeply worried her parents. They reached out to Luis, but he claimed he didn't know her whereabouts. He explained that they had argued because he had gone to visit his mother in Tala without taking Sisette along. Even when relatives visited Louise's home, he insisted she wasn't there. Although concerned, but says its parents initially believed Louise. However, they found it very unusual that she had left without informing anyone, and they couldn't reach her. Their calls went straight to voicemail. It became clear over time that her phone had been turned off. Extremely desperate, her family began searching for her by contacting friends and colleagues. Former colleagues and others have posted her photo on social media, appealing for information to help find her. Sadly, the search yielded no results, and it seemed as though she had vanished without a trace. Left with no other choice, her parents decided to ask the police for help. When Louise learned that Cezet's parents were filing a complaint, he didn't object, but refused to go with them, saying he needed to take his dog to the vet. This confused Cezet's mother, who could not understand why he was so indifferent to the disappearance of Cizet, the woman he always claimed to love. Others also began to suspect him. During police questioning, Louise stated that at the time of Cezet's disappearance, he was in Tala with his mother. While he had an alibi, the police were struck by his lack of concern over Cezet's situation. On September 25, 2020, the Prosecutor General's office ordered a search for Cizet, who is still missing. Investigators, along with her family, spent 3 weeks searching, checking morgues and other locations, but found no clues. Eventually, they decided to return to the building where Cizet lived with Louise to conduct a more detailed search. On October 9, Cezet's body was found wrapped in a sheet, lying inside the same building where she lived with Louise, at apartment number 1006. Initially, there were no visible signs of a struggle in the room, no blood or evidence of a fight. However, when investigators used luminol, it became apparent that this was the crime scene. They uncovered numerous bloodstains that had been cleaned up. The stains trailed from the main room to the bathroom, suggesting the body had been dragged between rooms. A large cleaned-up pool of blood was also found. Based on this evidence, a murder investigation was launched. Cezet's body was sent to a medical facility for further examination. The results showed that she had been brutally beaten all over her body. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. Louise became the primary suspect in the case, because he was the last person to see Cizet alive. He had reason to hide her body in the building, as he was the manager of the place, and their strained relationship made the motive all the more obvious. The police began searching other apartments in the building, including the apartment where Louise lives. There, they discovered some of Cezet's belongings, along with a significant quantity of illegal substances. Louise was discovered to be in possession of 50 bags of illegal drugs, along with 11 bank cards and an identity card. DNA tests and fingerprint analysis were conducted to determine whether Louise had been in the apartment where Cezet's body was discovered. DNA analysis from the crime scene confirmed traces of both Louise and Cizet, and his fingerprints were also found on her body. Investigation agency in Mexico City have issued an arrest warrant for Louise. At that time, he was in prison for possession of illegal drugs. During a hearing for the drug charges, Judge Landarange granted Louise conditional release, requiring him to post bail and report every 15 days. However, during the same hearing, the Bureau of Investigation issued a warrant for his arrest for Cezet's murder. Judge Hector Fernando Rojo San Pacheco issued the warrant, and Louise was arrested again. This time, he was transferred to the Eastern Detention Center, where he will be held until his trial for the Cizet murder case takes place. The hearing was delayed due to Louise's health issues. However, on November 8, he was officially charged with murder. The court accepted all the evidence presented by the prosecutor, identified him as involved in the crime, and confirmed his pre-trial detention as a precautionary measure. Furthermore, a 2.5-month deadline has been set to complete the further investigation. This information was widely spread, and details about his past as the Lord of Swindles began to be made public. A photo of him began to distributed, prompting many acquaintances to share what they knew about him. One of these individuals was Louis' ex-girlfriend, Anna. She said they met online in 2010 but only met in person in 2012. She claimed to have witnessed numerous fraudulent schemes he orchestrated to deceive people. She explained that his scams had enabled him to live a lavish lifestyle, allowing him to afford a luxury apartment and car. He often flaunted his wealth to impress his friends. Despite his efforts to mingle with wealthy individuals, he was looked down upon. According to Anna, he had been involved in scams since he was 18. Him telling her how he began by posting fake ads for mobile phones online, tricking people into paying without ever delivering the products. Anna explained that Louis had deceived many people using various methods. He told her that his father had passed away and left him a company, but she later discovered this was a lie. She claimed to have seen his phone and saw him chatting with many people using fake names. Additionally, she revealed that he was cruel to animals, such as attaching rockets to cats and burning dogs. Anna claimed that Louis stayed at her house for a while after undergoing plastic surgery, during which her dog, Bruno, was often with him. She recounted coming home on several occasions to find her dog frightened and limping. Once, she noticed her dog had urinated on the bed, something he had never done before. She also observed that the dog could not walk properly, was struggling to breathe, and had a broken back leg. She immediately suspected Louis, but he denied harming the dog. However, a veterinarian later confirmed that these injuries were caused by abusive behavior. In Anna's view, Louis' cruelty to animals was what eventually led him to start abusing people. She said that while they were still together, she to suspect that he was showing signs of mental illness and was convinced that he was responsible for Cézet's death. Although authorities had enough evidence to show that Louis was the one who killed Cézet, her family and friends had to wait nearly 3 years to see justice served. His legal team used various tactics to delay the trial. During this time, Cézet's parents actively participated in rallies demanding justice. Finally, on April 28, 2023, the Supreme Court of Mexico found Luis Alfonso Alvarez Lopez guilty of murder. He was sentenced to 39 years, 4 months, and 15 days in prison. Although he was only sentenced to a minimum of 39 years in prison, while the maximum sentence could have been up to 70 years, but Cézet's parents felt that the result was fair and they were satisfied with it. Finally, after a long process, justice has been served. Louis is now in prison. This can be considered the best outcome, considering the dangers he has caused to society. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Tiffany Maher. Tiffany Maher was born on April 29, 1973, in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her father was a college professor, and her mother, a Harvard graduate, eventually became a housewife. They had high expectations for Tiffany. Her parents set a goal for her to earn a college degree, and they worked hard to support her. Tiffany had a high IQ, and her family created a nurturing environment focused on education. As a result, she entered university, fulfilling her parents' dream for her. Tiffany has a sociable and humorous personality. She is very intelligent and friendly. Tiffany is not interested in romantic relationships. She focuses on her studies, which she enjoys very much. She feels that she has the ability to achieve great things with her intelligence, so she has chosen to postpone looking for a life partner. Tiffany is 40 years old and lives in the small town of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Although intelligent and educated, she is still single and is looking for her soulmate. She has a deep affection for animals, so her friends gave her 2 cats. The cats have become an important part of Tiffany's life. She loves them dearly and treats them as if they were her own children. During this time, Tiffany served as an associate professor in the chemistry department at Northeastern State University. She was well known for her sociable and friendly nature, easily connecting with everyone. Her lectures were not only informative, but also engaging, featuring a mix of stories and jokes that kept students entertained. Her cheerful personality made her beloved by everyone in her circle. Outside of work, Tiffany enjoyed crocheting and going to karaoke with friends. She was comfortable being alone and dedicated herself to her work, becoming one of the university's leading specialists, which was greatly appreciated. Tiffany often expressed that her job brought her happiness and allowed her to grow in her field. While many of her peers were focused on starting families and having children, she concentrated on education and expanding her knowledge. The situation changed as she got older. She wanted to find a partner to help her through the tough times. To achieve this, she created a profile on a dating website, hoping to meet the person she had always secretly dreamed of. On May 31, 2013, Tiffany's best friend, Sarah, received an unexpected text message from a staff member at the university where Tiffany worked. Tiffany was scheduled to give a presentation that day, but she did not show up, which was unusual for such a responsible person. Regardless of the circumstances, she always arrived early and prepared thoroughly, so her absence was very worrying. When the head of the educational institution spoke with other teachers, it became clear that Tiffany had not appeared in the department for several days. This aroused suspicion and caused anxiety. Sarah was really worried about her friend. She tried to contact Tiffany, but couldn't get through. For days, Tiffany ignored both calls and texts. Sarah had a feeling that something was wrong, but she tried to push those worrying thoughts away. When Sarah arrived at Tiffany's house, she immediately noticed something unusual. There was a black stain, like soot, on one of the second-story windows. Tiffany's car was missing from the driveway, which was unusual because she always parked there when she came home. Sarah also noticed that a small window, which Tiffany usually left open for her cats to come and go freely, was closed. Curious, Sarah went to the window to look inside and was devastated to see Tiffany's cat lying motionless on the floor. The situation was becoming increasingly alarming. Sarah decided not to go in, stayed outside, and called the police. She called 911 and explained what she had discovered, asking them to check on Tiffany. When police arrived at the scene, they found the main door of the house unlocked, allowing them easy access inside. Inside, they witnessed a horrific scene. There were many small fires in the house that had gone out. In the bedroom, they discovered Tiffany's body lying on the bed. Surprisingly, other than her burned legs, there were no visible injuries on Tiffany's body, and there were no defensive wounds on her hands or anywhere else on her body. After investigating the crime scene, the police determined that the fire originated in the living room and bedroom on the first floor. An object was placed under the sofa, but it did not catch fire, so the fire went out. A similar incident occurred in the bedroom, where the bottom of the bed was burned. The police who arrived at the scene discovered that several items were missing from Tiffany's home, including a laptop, a cell phone, a TV, a karaoke machine, and a car. The police concluded that this was likely a robbery. In addition, there are concerns that Tiffany may have been sexually assaulted. Suspicious marks on her underwear raise suspicion. All of these details will be collected for testing. A citywide alert was issued to begin searching for Tiffany's car, a 2011 red Ford Fiesta. Forensic experts quickly collected evidence at the crime scene, while police interviewed neighbors and people close to Tiffany. Since there were no signs of forced entry, it is believed that Tiffany knew the attacker and let him into her home willingly. Police first spoke with Tiffany's mother, Maria. She reported that she last saw her daughter on May 26, just 5 days before Tiffany was found. Maria and some relatives had attended a basketball game that day and had a good time together. Tiffany had plans to attend a date that evening, but did not share any details about the date. Maria noted that Tiffany seemed calm, untroubled, and had not received any threats. After the autopsy was completed, the medical examiner provided new information. They concluded that Tiffany died of asphyxiation, possibly from the pillowcase found at the scene. The police needed more time to investigate, but they found no signs of strangulation. Forensic experts also ruled out the possibility of death from fire because there was no smoke in Tiffany's lungs, suggesting she died before the fire broke out. It appears the killer set the fire to destroy evidence of the crime. The medical examiner estimated that Tiffany had been killed on May 26, 5 days before Sarah reported the incident to the police. The information Tiffany's mother provided about Tiffany's meeting on the day of her death seemed important. It was essential to find out who Tiffany was meeting with. The police needed to identify Tiffany's contacts and her method of communication. Tiffany's mother suggested that they investigate her office at the university, where she often spent a lot of time. At first, the office seemed unremarkable. However, police found a working computer and discovered that Tiffany had a profile on a dating website. Her best friend confirmed that Tiffany had recently been considering dating and finding a partner. Tiffany was using a popular Canadian dating website at the time. Police contacted the site's administrators to gather information about Tiffany's dating activities and messages. Since the site was based in Canada, they had to submit a request and wait for a response. Police then received a tip that led them to Tiffany's car, which had been found abandoned in the parking lot of an apartment building where her parents lived. Her parents did not mention the presence of the car, which aroused suspicion. Police interviewed them again, but her parents were completely unaware that their daughter's car was in the parking lot. After questioning, it became clear that her parents had nothing to do with the incident. It appeared that the criminal had intentionally left the stolen car near her parents' home to throw the investigation off track. The car was confiscated and sent for examination. Forensic experts examined it to find any signs of a potential thief. They discovered fingerprints on the steering wheel and DNA samples that did not belong to the Tiffany. The Canadian dating site's management has finally responded. They revealed that in early May, Tiffany created a profile and contacted multiple men at once. However, she mainly corresponded with one person. Unfortunately, this person did not provide his real name or surname. His account was Fander1980. There were no photos or phone numbers associated with the account, which raised suspicion from the start. Sadly, the account was deactivated the same day her body was discovered. It is possible that this person was involved in the murder, but attempts to contact him have been unsuccessful. Police were able to access messages exchanged between Tiffany's account and a user named Fander1980. Their conversations lasted for a long time and did not contain any flirtatious behavior. Police reviewed Tiffany's phone records and discovered that she was frequently communicating with someone, although this person's name was not saved in her contacts. When they called the number, no one answered. However, after further analysis, they discovered that the phone number was registered to an account named Big Daddy on another website, which was the same person named Fander1980. The criminal was registered at an address in Talos, but when police arrived, they found only an abandoned commercial building. It was clear that the suspect had made efforts to conceal his identity. When the police accessed Big Daddy's account, they discovered it had been deactivated on May 2, just 2 days after the Tiffany's death. Remarkably, just 3 minutes later, he registered again under a new name. Given that several items were stolen from the Tiffany's home around the same time, the police decided to check local pawn shops. This means the thief's information may have been recorded by the pawn shop employees. The investigation included checking pawn shops in the city. It was discovered that a man named Joshua John Schneider had gone to one of those stores with Tiffany's items. Police eventually identified him as the prime suspect. 38-year-old Joshua was from Broken Arrow, Oklahoma. Joshua was a regular at the police station and had served time in prison for car theft and sex crimes. He was convicted of rape in 1999. Joshua often used dating websites to find lonely women to rape. While Joshua was living with his girlfriend and their 2-year-old daughter, police tried to contact him at his home address, but he was not there and could not be reached. Police spoke to Joshua's mother, who said she did not know where her son was. On July 27, 2013, the police received a tip about Joshua's whereabouts from an anonymous person. Police were then dispatched to arrest him. This led to a police chase. Joshua was in the car with Heather and child at the time. Police followed him until he reached a wooded area near Tulsa, where he abandoned the car and fled, leaving his family behind. Joshua was arrested 10 days later, and during the arrest, Tiffany's cell phone was discovered in his backpack. Despite this evidence, Joshua claimed that he knew nothing about Tiffany. However, police soon found Tiffany's laptop and other stolen items at Joshua's home, where he lived with girlfriend Heather Black. This raised suspicions about Heather's involvement, leading to her arrest as well. The child was placed in the care of Child Protective Services, and Joshua's DNA was found on Tiffany's bedsheets and on the steering wheel of her car. This evidence linked him to the crime. The police found a text message from his mother on his phone. She had written it shortly after the police arrived at the house. She warned him that he should run away because the police were looking for him. She was then made an accomplice, as she had tried to cover up for the murderer. Joshua and his mother, Karen, were then taken to the police station. It was clear that she was trying to warn her son and help him avoid the police. It is also possible that she was involved in the crime, and those theories need to be investigated. At first, Karen claimed that she did not understand what was going on. However, when she realized that the police had strong evidence for an arrest, she became increasingly concerned. She eventually admitted that she had warned her son after the police arrived, but denied any involvement in any other wrongdoing. In July 2013, Joshua was arrested for murder, rape, robbery, and attempting to cover up the Tiffany investigation. His girlfriend, Heather, chose to cooperate with the police, and all charges against her were dropped. During the hearing, she confirmed that Joshua had confessed to Tiffany's murder and that he had tried to avoid the police, putting both her and her daughter in danger. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Joshua began to speak out. He claimed that his online relationship with Tiffany began as a simple flirtation, but they eventually decided to meet in person. On the day of their meeting, they had sex and then spent some time talking. When Joshua suddenly confessed that he was living with a girl and a child, Tiffany was furious. She then threatened to expose their relationship. This led to a fight. While trying to defend herself from Tiffany's attacks, he hit her, causing her to fall and become unconscious. There was also a fire, and he was not sure how it started. He claimed that when Joshua left the scene, Tiffany was dead. However, the prosecutor's office believed his entire story to be a lie and found it completely unbelievable. The prosecutor's office pieced together the facts of the case. On May 26, Tiffany attended a basketball game with her parents. That evening, she met Joshua at her home. When he arrived, Joshua overpowered her, attacked her, and then strangled her. He claimed that their encounter was consensual, but experts believe that was not the case. He decided to kill Tiffany and then steal her belongings. He then tried to burn the house down to destroy the evidence. However, he fled the scene before realizing that the arson had failed. It was clear that the fire was intentional. After leaving the crime scene, he stole Tiffany's car. He then used it to drive to Tiffany's parents' apartment complex. He left the car there to distract the investigation. Police discovered that some of the stolen items were sold by Joshua at pawn shops, while other items such as his phone and computer were left at his home, Joshua. The defense argued that Joshua had been abused by his father as a child, which had a negative impact on him. However, this claim is not convincing, given the horrific nature of the massacre. There is no way to justify such actions. Joshua was a danger to society and showed no remorse for his crimes. Throughout the trial, there was no sympathy for his. As a result, the jury found Joshua John Schneider guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Joshua was denied parole. He questioned the jury's ability to conduct a fair investigation and argued that Tiffany's death could have been an accident or manslaughter, since she had invited Joshua to her home. His attorney sought a retrial, believing that this would result in Joshua receiving a fair trial. The defense argued that Joshua's constitutional rights had been violated and that the investigation had been hasty in its conclusion. The defense argued that not all of the evidence from the investigation was presented to the jury. They pointed out that Joshua's girlfriend Heather was involved in the case. However, she was able to clear herself of any wrongdoing. Joshua is serving his sentence at the Davis Correctional Facility in Holdenville, Oklahoma. Despite this outcome, the lawyer continued to advocate for Joshua's case. He appealed to the jury's sympathy, highlighting that Joshua had a 2-year-old child who would be left without a parent. The defense maintained that Joshua was incapable of committing such a crime, arguing that he loved his son and did not want to return to prison and lose the chance to raise him. Once again, accusations were directed at Heather, but these efforts did not yield any changes in Joshua's sentence, which was ultimately upheld. Hello, everyone. Today, we will learn about another case, the case of Alexandra Duxay. Alexandra Duxay, a talented and ambitious young woman, was once the pride of her family and friends with a promising career in the entertainment industry. With her radiant appearance, intelligence, and burning passion, Alexandra appeared in many television shows and relentlessly pursued her big dream. But everything suddenly stopped one day in May 2006, when she was found brutally murdered in the basement of her family's home in Milford, Connecticut. Alexandra's tragic death not only shocked the community, but also opened a years-long investigation, revealing haunting hidden corners of the person who took her life. Alexandra was born on December 9, 1979, in New Haven, Connecticut, USA. Her relatives called her Sandra. She grew up on the coast, just an hour outside of New York. In the Milford area, Alexandra's parents were named John and Linda. The girl's parents met in 1974 in Connecticut, and a few months later, they got married. Alexandra had 2 older brothers. Despite the age difference, they were very close. The brothers looked after their younger sister and helped their parents. They all played sports together and spent most of their time playing games. They lived in a big house, and Alexandra used the basement as her room. Later, she equipped it not only as a bedroom, but also as a gym, where she invited friends over for overnight stays and socializing. Alexandra was engaged in dancing and gymnastics in high school. She had a dream of becoming an actress, which quite corresponded with her ambitious and active character. She had been dancing throughout her childhood, and in her youth, she began to take part in various competitions, earning awards along the way. She had a very busy schedule. In addition to dancing, Alexandra continued her studies to get a degree in law. After receiving her secondary education, she entered college. Alexandra completed dance courses and then got a part-time job at a bank. While working there, she met her first love, a guy named Matthew Pugh. Both loved sports and worked hard. Alexandra was able to obtain a bachelor's degree in finance and became a systems analyst at the same bank where she had worked for several years prior. She dedicated almost 10 years to this business, and in parallel, She received a license as a real estate agent at the age of 23. Alexandra also became an assistant teacher at the dance academy. Career successes accompanied her, and later, Alexandra performed a lot in New York, dancing at events and even starring in music videos. At 26, she began working with a producer from Atlanta to create demo versions of videos for music albums. Her dreams began to materialize. An agent in New York who helped her pass auditions, and as a result, she landed supporting roles in a popular TV series for Alexandra. It was a significant milestone, despite the secondary role. She believed it was only a stepping stone to greater success, given the scale of her activities. She had practically no time for a personal life, despite having dated her boyfriend for years. By January 2004, they decided to break up. Alexandra chose to fully concentrate on work and dancing. This decision coincided with a difficult time for her family. Her parents also decided to separate. Her father returned to Florida to be closer to his elderly mother. By this time, Alexandra's brothers had moved away and were living with their own families, leaving her effectively alone with her mother. Despite most of the house being vacated, she continued to live in the basement, which she had equipped for her own purposes. It contained training equipment as well as a whole stand filled with dance awards. Alexandra lived in the basement with her big dog, and her busy life did not prevent her from attending acting auditions. She had new prospects in cinema during this period and also became interested in charity work. She collected items and toys for children from low-income families and later planned to organize a free canteen for those in need with like-minded individuals. However, the situation changed dramatically. On May 19, 2006, Alexandra met her best friend, Nicole, with whom she worked out at the gym. They trained together from 10.15 to 11.15, after which her friend left. Nicole wanted to stay longer at the gym, while Alexandra planned to go home for lunch and to get ready for her evening plans. Around 4 p.m., Nicole called Alexandra, but the call went straight to voicemail. This was unusual, as Alexandra was usually very responsive due to her work requiring frequent phone communication. By 4:03 p.m., Alexandra still had not replied. Meanwhile, Linda, Alexandra's mother, arrived home and noticed the front door was wide open. Alexandra's favorite dog was outside in the courtyard, and her daughter's white Mitsubishi was parked in the driveway. This was odd because the doors were usually closed, and the dog never went outside without a collar and leash. The dog sat outside, wagging its tail, which added to Linda's concern. She was in a panic, trying to understand what had happened. So she entered the house screaming. As Linda moved through the house, her anxiety grew. She went to the basement stairs and noticed large drops of dark red liquids on the floor. When she reached the bottom, she saw another large dark red liquid stain. To her horror, she found Alexandra lying on her back, unresponsive. With a massive pool of red liquid beneath her, Alexandra had a severe head injury and was lying in an unnatural position under a table. The mother initially thought her daughter might have fallen down the stairs and hit her head on the radiator, which had a visible blood stain. Linda rushed to her daughter to check for a pulse, but found none. She could barely regain her composure and managed to call 911 in a state of panic. She screamed into the phone, trying to describe the horrific scene before her. The dispatcher struggled to understand her, as her words were often interrupted by sobs and incoherent mumbling. Eventually, the dispatcher understood that Linda's daughter was lying on the basement floor and showed no signs of life. When several police officers arrived, Linda met them outside. The sight they encountered in the basement was one of the most disturbing they had ever seen. In here, there are traces of a terrible attack, and Alexandra's face was seriously injured. A piece of the knife was found embedded in her skull. The broken handle lay nearby. It was clear that Alexandra had been attacked with a kitchen knife, with such force that the handle had snapped off. Alexandra received blunt force trauma to the face, and her mother discovered that one of Alexandra's trophies was missing, investigators believe the perpetrator used the trophy to seriously injure Alexandra's face. The police quickly concluded that Alexandra was a murder victim, along with the brutal injuries and the apparent murder weapon. Investigators found a shoe print in the blood. This shoe print lacked a typical tread pattern. Additionally, small traces of blood were found in other areas of the house, including the bathroom on the toilet seat and sink, presumably where the attacker was trying to wash his hands. Moreover, investigators noticed signs of an attempt to clean the red streaks in certain spots around the home. This led law enforcement to suspect that there was a personal motive behind the crime, possibly related to the missing trophy. Given the violent nature of the attack, they believed the culprit was likely someone known to Alexandra. While most furniture and belongings in the apartment were untouched, nearly all the clothes had been removed from the closet, and valuables like jewelry and money were left behind. It appeared the assailant was searching for something specific, which resulted in items being strewn across the bed and floor. The police reported that Alexandra was attacked when she went to the basement. She was pushed down the stairs. Suffering her first injury when she hit her head on the radiator, she did not die immediately. As there were clear signs of a struggle, detectives quickly determined that the knife used in the attack had been brought from outside. Since none of the kitchen utensils from the house were missing, investigators accessed a mobile phone belonging to the victim and discovered over 100 phone numbers she was familiar with, all of which needed to be thoroughly examined. During the investigation of the crime scene, another notable detail emerged. A garbage bag had been removed from the trash can. This suggested that the attacker had disposed of it to avoid leaving crucial evidence for the investigators. They believed that he might have changed his clothes, using the large garbage bag to dispose of blood-stained items around 5 p.m. Alexandra's brother and her friend Nicole arrived at the scene. Nicole was in a state of hysteria because, having seen Alexandra alive a few hours earlier, the quiet Milford area where Alexandra lives is filled with people close to her. Including Linda and Nicole, the local community was anxious to know what had happened, but the police refused to provide any comments until they clarified the circumstances of the crime. The house was cordoned off. A friend mentioned that after her workout, Alexandra had planned to get ready for a date with a new guy, whom she intended to meet at a restaurant. Nicole identified the guy as Jason Malone, but she did not know any other details, which making him a person of interest for the police. Detectives and family members of Alexandra were canvassing the area and interviewing residents. In Milford, a place known for its low crime rate, this incident shocked the community. Alexandra was a celebrity known for her minor roles in the TV series Law and Order Now. She herself has become the face of crime reporting. The seriousness of the situation brought national media attention. The police reached out to the media to seek potential witnesses, prompting local journalists to actively search for information. However, neighbors provided conflicting accounts. One man reported seeing a red pickup truck near the scene around 12:3 p.m. that he believed did not belong to anyone in the area. Another neighbor claimed to have seen a black man walking past the victim's house around 4 p.m., who then got into a dark green Honda Accord. Unfortunately, none of the witnesses took photos or remembered the license plate numbers. Meanwhile, detectives were trying to learn more about Jason, who out to be Alexandra's new boyfriend, although they couldn't reach him directly. His sister answered the police's calls and provided information about him, allowing them to invite him to the police station for questioning. When Jason arrived, he appeared nervous, but firmly stated that he had no involvement in the murder. He confirmed that he was Alexandra's new boyfriend, explaining that they met when he visited the bank with a friend. He was shy and told his friend that he found her very attractive. Jason asked his friend to get Alexandra's phone number for him, which she agreed. That evening, she called Jason. They arranged to meet and chat, eventually planning their first date. Jason was a few years older than Alexandra at the time of their meeting. He lived with his mother, having moved out from his ex-girlfriend, with whom he had broken up. Jason was experiencing a tough time, as his relationship with his ex sometimes rekindled and then fell apart again. He worked for an energy company, where he checked electric meters in homes throughout the city. Meanwhile, Alexandra was in no hurry to announce them as a couple. After a 6-year relationship with her ex, she wanted to take a closer look at her new boyfriend and make no statements about him. At the station, Jason reported that he called Alexandra around noon. They had a calm conversation and made plans for the evening, intending to have dinner together. During their phone call, Alexandra suddenly asked him to hold on because she saw her ex-boyfriend outside her house. Jason then heard the door open, and Alexandra asked, "What are you doing here?" but received no response. After the door closed, she picked up her phone again and told Jason she couldn't talk at that moment. Jason suspected that she let someone into her house and then didn't call him back, which made him feel suspicious and a bit jealous. 15 minutes later, when she still hadn't called back, he started to worry. Fortunately, she answered his call at 12:35. They spoke for a few more minutes, but Alexandra didn't mention who had visited her or why. Jason's account helped narrow down the time frame of when Alexandra died, according to Jason. During this period, he was busy with work, driving around the city and checking equipment. After 3 p.m., he went to a clothing store to choose new pants for their date. Around 4:3, he tried calling her again, but she didn't answer. Later, when he went to her house, he noticed police cars nearby. The police talked to the victim's relatives and found out that Alexandra's only ex-boyfriend was Matthew. However, they had broken up 2 years, while detectives were working on obtaining a warrant to examine mobile phones. They spoke with Alexandra's relatives. They learned that her breakup with her ex-boyfriend was not smooth. Linda was aware that Matthew had a criminal record and had treated Alexandra poorly. Their relationship lasted until Matthew was first imprisoned in 1998. During his time in prison, Alexandra supported and visited him, but he ended up serving a long sentence, despite Alexandra's love for him. Doubts about their relationship grew. By January 2004, they officially ended their relationship, partly due to Matthew's increasingly rude and threatening behavior. Although they still communicated, his aggression continued to rise. So was no chance of rekindling their relationship. At this time, Matthew was found living with his wife about 30 minutes from the home of Alexandra on the day the police arrived. He was working at a Papa John's restaurant. The conversation with the police took place right there on the 15th. He mentioned that he had 2 jobs, the second being with a company that manufactures aircraft parts. Located about an hour north of Milford, he claimed he was working from 6:3 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the day of the murder and left home only after learning that Alexandra had died. The police noticed he appeared somewhat confused during the conversation. Matthew appeared to distrust the police, but he did admit that he had spoken to Alexandra on the phone a few days before her death. Their last in-person meeting, however, had occurred at least 4 weeks prior to the tragic event. After this conversation, the detectives left the following day. Matthew returned to the police station and confessed that he had lied during their previous discussion. He clarified that he actually arrived at work at 6:3 a.m., but at 9:15 a.m., he requested time off and left. He spent most of the day at home and went into town to care for a sick relative. Matthew insisted that he was neither in Milford nor close to the suburbs that day. He agreed to take a DNA test and provided the police with the clothes he wore on the day of his ex-girlfriend's death. The investigation continued, and both he and Jason remained the main suspects in the murder. Forensic experts determined that Alexandra had died from multiple stab wounds, cuts, and blunt force trauma. Primarily to her face, the attack was so brutal that she had swallowed several of her own knocked-out teeth before dying. The expert discovered a crucial piece of evidence. A hair found stuck to the dried blood on Alexandra's body did not belong to her. Additionally, pieces of duct tape were found on her face. Apparently, it was used to tape her mouth during the massacre. Investigators looked into Jason's background and found that he had a criminal record. Having served over 5 years for banned substance trafficking, he also drove a car that matched the description given by a neighbor of one of the victims. Another witness reported seeing this dark green car parked near Alexandra's house throughout the day. Despite this, Jason maintained his innocence, arguing that the car model he drove was very common in the city at that time. However, detectives could verify not his alibi of being at a clothing store to buy pants around 3 p.m. He had indeed visited the store, but much later in the evening, which contradicted his statement. Maybe he was trying to mislead the investigation, however, by checking the geolocation data from his phone calls. Investigators found that although his phone was active throughout the day, it never registered in the Milford area. Consequently, the police ruled him out as a suspect. It was now Matthew's turn to be questioned. The police spoke with Alexandra's mother to gather more information about him. She had never liked Matthew. He was 7 years older than Alexandra and had a criminal record. Unlike Alexandra, he showed no interest in personal growth or work. The detectives then contacted his employer, who confirmed that he had left work much earlier than he had claimed. Instead of finishing at 9:15 a.m., he actually left at 8:39 a.m. He had also been at a gas station at 2:1 p.m., not at noon, as he had told the police. The discrepancies in his words were alarming. While he spent time at car dealerships until 4 p.m., the times he provided were incorrect. The investigators suspected that Matthew might be the murderer. On May 26, they obtained a search warrant for his house. Inside, everything was tidy and clean, with nothing suspicious found except for some fine art. It was assumed that the remains of this roll could have been found on the victim's face. However, this did not indicate involvement in the murder. Since many people have electrical tape in their homes, all other tests and analyses failed to link Matthew to the crime. A thorough search of his property yielded no results. Leaving the investigation at a standstill, the only remaining action for the police was to send the electrical tape they had found for lab analysis. This type of tape was quite specific and difficult to find. It was not available in regular stores or online. In 2006, only 3 nearby companies used it, one of which was an aircraft parts plant where Matthew works. The electrical tape found on Alexandra's face had the same adhesive base, which could indicate the real killer. The police decided to contact Matthew's relatives again, and they uncovered important information. Matthew's brother revealed that he had a fierce temper and a potential motive against Alexandra. They discovered that, in 2002, he had given Alexandra his Nissan car and later lent her $2. She broke up with him in January 2004 while he was in prison, and she refused to return anything. It made him very angry. On June 14, detectives re-interrogated the suspect, highlighting the inconsistencies in his story. But Matthew managed to explain each of the disputed points, leaving the police with no new evidence. It wasn't until the end of the year that the DNA test results were available. The tests revealed that all the blood in the basement belonged solely to Alexandra. The blood droplets found in the bathroom were more special, as they belonged to her and a man. However, the concentration was too low to extract precise DNA profiles based on the results of the examination. Experts were able to establish that the killer was a black man. The hair found on Alexandra's hand could not be identified, and none of the fingerprints collected at the crime scene matched the suspects. Additionally, the specific shoe print could not be traced. Consequently, the investigation reached another standstill. A reward of $50 was offered for any information that could help advance the case. In 2010, authorities decided to reach out to prisoners. A photo of Alexandra was shared with correctional facilities. In September 2011, a prisoner named Paula contacted the Milford Police Department. She revealed that her former cellmate, Christopher Richards, had been in a relationship with Alexandra for 2 years before her death. Paula noted that they were together during the time between Alexandra's breakup with Matthew and the start of her relationship with Jason. Surprisingly, this relationship was unknown to others. When Alexandra informed Christopher's about their breakup, he was in prison. He became very angry and told his cellmate that he wanted to kill her. Once he was released, an investigation was launched to look into the situation, and they was discovered that the person who contacted the police had lied. Christopher did not know Alexandra, and there had been no communication between them, which would be unusual in a 2-year relationship. It seemed likely that this prisoner was trying to frame his cellmate. 2 weeks later, a bus driver named Jeremy, who had been friends with Alexandra for a long time, came forward with information. He reported that he had witnessed Alexandra receiving a threatening text from a man named Donovan. Donovan demanded repayment of money that Alexandra had lent him and threatened to kill her if she did not pay him back. Jeremy stated that this occurred just 2 weeks before her death. However, it appeared that Alexandra did not take these threats seriously. Ultimately, this claim was also found to be false. 6 years later, in August 2012, detectives finally received crucial information. Anthony Pugh, Matthew's cousin, reached out to the police station. He revealed details about a gifted car and the $2 that Alexandra had borrowed from her brother. His long story began back in 1993, when Matthew involved him in a criminal scheme. Both were later imprisoned for their actions and, after being released in 2005 and 2006, they found jobs at the same plant, although they maintained a good relationship. A year later, Matthew betrayed Anthony, leading to Anthony's imprisonment. So, Anthony decided to take revenge by sharing the truth. Anthony disclosed that when Matthew broke up with Alexandra, he became obsessed with her and even considered killing her. Matthew planned to inject her with a lethal dose of drugs to make it look like an accidental overdose. However, upon learning about her new relationship, he changed his mind and opted for a more violent method of murder. The brothers worked at the same aircraft factory where Matthew stole gloves and special tape to commit a crime. Police believe he wanted to profit from this information, and he later admitted it directly. Anthony sought not only $50, but also sought revenge on his brother. When the information was verified, it was found that during the initial data analysis, the police overlooked that Matthew was indeed in the area near Milford at around 11.47, but left at 12.07. He returned and stayed at the scene for over an hour. Ultimately, the police had strong grounds to arrest Matthew and file charges against him. On August 24, 2012, Matthew Pugh was charged with first-degree murder and home invasion. However, at that time, he was already in prison for assaulting a woman in 2008. He threatened the victim with a weapon and stole her purse when she tried to resist. He's attacked her in the arm. The prosecutor's office found out that the problems with Matthew began after Alexandra wrote to the prison that she wanted to break up. According to cellmates, he was obsessed with her. In response, he wrote an 8-page letter over a couple of months. Of course, he was angry because of these events, but after leaving prison, he did not show any aggression towards his ex. He started a relationship and even had a child. But at the same time, Matthew, all this time, hatched a plan. 3 years later, in February 2015, Matthew appeared in court. The prosecution claimed that the guy committed a deliberate massacre on the basis of jealousy. The lawyer insisted that the client was not involved in the murder because there was no direct evidence in the form of DNA and fingerprints at the crime scene. The situation for Matthew became completely stalemate when he began to answer the prosecution's questions. He desperately tried to prove his innocence, but it all didn't seem very plausible. Besides, his brother was testifying against him. The jury went to pass sentence. It was really not easy. In this complicated story, there were many blank spots, and many considered the accused a pathological liar. It was even necessary to ask the court to repeat Matthew's story. Only 3 days later, the jury found him guilty of first-degree murder and trespassing. He was sentenced to 60 years in prison for murder and another 20 for trespassing. The Alexandra Duxie case is a heartbreaking and complex one that leaves many unanswered questions, from the tangled relationships between Alexandra and those around her to the doubts about who took her life. The case remains one of the most controversial and haunting in Milford, Connecticut, although the killer, Matthew Pugh, has been convicted. Stories of motives, complicated relationships, and unclear details continue to haunt the public. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Scott Collins. Fred Rose was born in 1950 in California, USA. In the early 1970s, Fred married his beloved Sharon. They decided to take their time and enjoy their first years together before giving birth. In 1976, they welcomed their first child, Justin. 2 years later, they had a daughter named Amy, and then their youngest child, Heather, was born. Balancing their professional lives with raising children provided them with a happy life. For Fred, family was extremely important, and he cherished every moment spent with them, whether during daily life or on vacations. They had fun trips, and one of their most memorable vacations was in San Diego, where the children were thrilled to see the many animals at the local zoo. In the early 1990s, their family lived in the Valencia area of Santa Clarita County, Los Angeles. Fred worked as an executive at a construction company that specialized in maintaining petrol stations. His job was based in Lancaster, but it required him to travel frequently. Nearby lived a 21-year-old man named Scott Forrest Collins. Scott lived with his mother. He had a long criminal history that included offenses such as arson, stabbing a man, stealing a woman's car, and threatening a teenager with a knife. In 1989, he was convicted of armed robbery and sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he was released on parole in late December 1991, returning to life on the streets of California. After his release, Scott reconnected with his mother, who some people described as manipulative and controversial. Shortly after his release, Scott began dating with a young woman. She lived with her parents, just a few blocks away from his cousin Amaya. Scott and Amaya were the same age, shared similar interests, and were part of the same group of friends involved in gangs and criminal activities. On Wednesday, January 22, 1992, Fred was on a business trip in Fountain and stayed overnight. The next day, at 11:00 a.m., Scott's mother dropped him off in Lancaster. He was dressed in blue pants, a sweatshirt, and popular brand sneakers. Later that day, around 1:00 p.m., Fred returned to his office in Lancaster and had a brief chat with his boss, Thomas Marriott. After the conversation, it was past 2 p.m. Realizing he was late for lunch, he informed Barbara Kopp, the office manager and dispatcher, that he was going to get a hamburger. As part of her responsibilities, Barbara kept track of employees and noted their departure time, so she checked her watch and recorded the exact time Fred left. Fred usually visited a fast food restaurant near his workplace, but on that particular day, he decided to do something different. After getting into his gray company car, he was approached by Scott, who threatened him and demanded the code for his bank card. Scott then drove about 90 kilometers south. At around 4 p.m., Fred then completed a transaction at the ATM. A bank employee reported that Fred withdrew $200 from the Northridge branch at 4:05 p.m. A minute later, another withdrawal attempt was made, but it was declined because Fred had reached his daily limit. The entire incident was recorded on surveillance camera. After the transaction, Scott held Fred's wallet in hand, forced him to drive to the San Fernando Valley. Meanwhile, Fred's co-workers began to worry when they noticed he had left his computer on and his briefcase open, which was uncharacteristic of him. After a long drive from 6:00 to 6:30 p.m., Scott realized he couldn't allow Fred to betray him. He forced Fred out of the car by the train tracks, aimed his weapon, and attacked Fred. Scott then fled the crime scene in Fred's car. A man lived nearby, heard 2 detonations about 3 to 5 seconds apart, after he went outside. He noticed a car driving away to the west without its headlights on, although it was dark. He thought the car might be silver or gray. Another neighbor also heard the detonations and looked out her window, see the same thing. Besides, she noticed that there was a sticker on the car's bumper. A third neighbor also reacted to the detonations. He suspected that the car might be related to the incident and attempted to note the license plate, but the darkness made it impossible to see. Meanwhile, Sharon was worried because she had not heard from her husband. She called friends for information, but when neither his boss nor his mother, Doris Baker, no information. So Sharon filed a missing person report with the police just before 9 p.m. A man was jogging near the railroad tracks, found one person lying on the ground. Initially thinking the man was just drunk, he continued running. However, when he returned 20 minutes later and saw that the man was still there, he approached and noticed blood. He quickly ran to a nearby garage and called 911. The first responders to arrive were from the LA Fire Department. Although the victim suffered a bullet wound to the head, there were still signs of life. Fred, unable to speak and in a state of panic, the rescuer placed an oxygen mask on him, while the second rescuer removed Fred's clothing to check for additional injuries. Fred was then airlifted to Northridge Medical Center. Meanwhile, Scott filled up the car with gas and paid with one of the credit cards he stole. He attempted to buy a 12-pack of beer, but the cashier asked for identification, so he left without them. Meanwhile, the officers arrived at the scene and secured this area. Detective then joined the team at the crime scene. He requested a photographer who took numerous pictures of the area, noticed footprints near the bloodstains, which were also photographed. On Friday morning, while Fred was fighting for his life and his family prayed for a miracle, Scott said goodbye to his girlfriend without telling she what had happened. He gave her $40 and left. A few hours later, they met again and went to Tecate, where Scott bought a beer with a $100 bill. 2 days after the attack, at 11 a.m., doctors determined they could do nothing more for Fred and removed him from life support. Sharon and her 3 children embraced in sorrow. The autopsy, conducted by Dr. William Ryan, revealed that Fred died from an assault weapon wound to the upper right back of his head. Although the bullet was not retrieved, small lead fragments were found. Dr. William, drawing on his experience, provided key insights to investigators. He noted that the size of the wound and the brain damage indicated that the injury was likely caused by a short-barreled weapon. That evening, Scott and his girlfriend went to buy 4 cases of beer. Knowing that her boyfriend did not have a permanent job, she began to suspect something. Scott, however, reassured her that his cousin had given him some money. A group of young people joined Scott to drink and listen to music, with most of them being minors. They noticed an unfamiliar car parked across the street. Scott admitted to his cousin that he had stolen the car. He also showed off a weapon that was wrapped in a handkerchief. However, the weapon had a problem. To use it, he had to insert a nail into a hole beneath the barrel. Scott's reckless behavior heightened the excitement of the party, and everyone was curious about his criminal activities. Later that night, Scott and his friends decided to go to the Smile. They moved to the nearest field where Scott held the weapon and make it work. The group then moved to a residential area targeting 2 people but missed. Despite trying several more times, this weapon continued to malfunction. The police received information about a group of dangerous subjects and immediately a chase took place. In a scared, Scott threw several items out of the window, including a weapon, bullets, credit cards, and a watch. The situation escalated when the car crashed into a fence. The constable approached them and instructing them to remain still. As the only adult, Scott was taken to Kern County Jail, while the others were transported to a juvenile detention center. Scott was dressed in a dark shirt, blue pants, branded sneakers, and a baseball cap. In his pants pockets, they found a wallet, gloves, a handkerchief, and 2.38 caliber bullets. Near the crash site, they discovered the car keys, credit cards belonging to Fred, a .38 caliber bullet, and an empty shell casing. Finally, about a block and a half away, they recovered a weapon with a broken hammer and another bullet, along with 2 empty shell casings, which appeared to match attacks that had missed their target. The investigation continued, including testimony from other team members. Eventually, each member disclosed what they had heard from Scott. Besides, the forensic scientist and fingerprint expert analyzed the shoe prints found at the crime scene, comparing them with the soles of Scott's shoes. He concluded that 7 of the photos matched the shoe sample of the suspected individual. The detective confirmed that the fingerprints were located just inches away from the reddish stains left by Fred at the scene of his fatal attack. Then, Scott was interviewed. At this time, Scott still steadfastly denied any involvement in Fred's murder. Based on witnesses and valuable evidence available, in March 1992, Scott was officially charged with murder and armed robbery. Scott maintained his innocence and denied all accusations. Meanwhile, Justin and Amy sought counseling to help them cope with the loss of their father when they were both teenagers. After a long wait, the trial concluded in 1996 when Scott faced court in Van Nuys. During the trial, witnesses described him as a kind and peaceful man. Scott asserted that he had simply stumbled upon an abandoned car and drove off. Inside, he found a wallet and used the credit cards, but he insisted he was not involved in the crime. Neil Potter, the manager of patents and inventions for the company that made the athletic shoes worn by the defendant, testified that the shoe prints found at the crime scene matched size 13 OVI shoes, though he acknowledged there could be slight size variations. Neighbors from the area also provided testimony. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict on September 30, 1996. Scott Forrest Collins was found guilty of first-degree murder, along with 2 special circumstances: murder committed during a robbery and murder committed during a kidnapping with intent to rob. This verdict led to a sentencing hearing on October 12, where defense attorney Bruce Hill tried to challenge the prosecution's evidence. He pointed out Scott's troubled upbringing and a diagnosis of attention deficit disorder. Judge Howard Schwab ultimately sentenced Scott to death for the murder of Fred Rose. While Scott awaited his execution on death row, Heather, Justin, and Amy focused on healing and adjusting to adulthood, while Sharon chose not to remarry. Fred's absence was deeply felt, especially during important times like Christmas. In 2019, California Governor Gavin Newsom announced a temporary halt to executions in the state. In December 2020, George Gaskin, a former deputy police chief in Los Angeles, became the city's district attorney. He started implementing reforms aimed at improving sentencing practices, banning certain firearms, and re-examining past convictions. In there, one case that was reviewed for possible leniency was that of Scott. The prosecutor's office argued that Scott's good behavior over more than 20 years saved him from the death penalty. Former federal prosecutor Nima Rahmani raised concerns to the media, highlighting the distress caused to Fred's family. He noted that there was no real benefit in the current context due to the governor's pause on executions. This situation caught Sharon and her children off guard. They saw the prosecutor's actions as a favor to the convicted individual. Consequently, the family's lawyers, along with vocal critic George Steve Cooley and attorney Katie KDI, filed a lawsuit claiming that the criminal justice system was failing. In that situation, George Gaskin's office clarified that their intention was not to release Scott, but rather to halt his execution. Sharon openly shared her frustration, pointing out that neither she nor any family members received clear explanations regarding the petition. When she attempted to view the case file, she was directed to a virtual call and later discovered that the case records had been removed from the online database. They were initially told the authorities would have months to review the documents before any commutation agreement was submitted, but that did not happen. The agreement was made without knowledge of the Rose family. Amy also expressed that she, her brothers, and their mother felt betrayed and anxious, especially when they were later told not to pursue a trial. She insisted on their right to have legal representation and seek justice. For Amy, the concern extended beyond the current sentence. She feared that a commuted death sentence could eventually lead to a life sentence being reduced in the future. Feeling powerless, she and her brothers reached out to a private law firm for assistance. Ultimately, a hearing took place before Superior Court Judge William Ryan. Amy, in a written statement read to the court, discussed the lasting trauma of losing her father as a teenager and how knowing Scott was incarcerated had brought her comfort. However, the possibility of his sentence being revoked had resulted in many sleepless nights for her. In February 2022, Fred Rose's family learned that Scott would be sentenced to life in prison without the chance for parole. This decision confirmed that neither he would ever be released. Then, Scott was moved to a voluntary program at the correctional facility in Tehachapi, California, which is designed for prisoners who show good behavior. In the meantime, the Rose family cherishes their happy memories of Fred, a caring husband and father who had left a lasting mark on all who knew him. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Rachel Nichol. On a sunny July morning, a young woman took her son for a walk in the city park. They planned to go out early, since the day was expected to be hot, while enjoying the summer morning. They strolled along a quiet path by the stream when a stranger suddenly appeared in front of them. Rachel Nichol was born on November 23, 1968. In London, she was beautiful and artistic. With an early interest in fashion, at the age of 10, she announced that she wanted to become a model. With determination and her striking looks, she achieved her dream. By the age of 20, she was participating in London Fashion Week. But Rachel's success on the catwalk was short-lived. In 1989, she met a Spaniard named Andre Hanscom. This fateful encounter quickly developed into a passionate love affair. Shortly after, Rachel discovered she was pregnant, which made Rachel happy. But at the same time, she knew that she would have to put her modeling career on hold to focus on motherhood. At that time, Rachel began to change her life. In 1990, Alexander was born to young parents who were not married and were in no hurry to enter into a legal relationship. They lived together harmoniously, with Andre earning a good income that allowed Rachel to focus entirely on raising their child. The family settled in a comfortable apartment in southwest London, near Wimbledon Common, where they adopted a dog named Molly and enjoyed a peaceful family life. On the sunny and calm morning of July 15, 1992, the weather forecast predicted a hot day. Because of this, Rachel opted for an earlier walk than usual, around 9 a.m. Rachel took her 2-year-old son Alexander and their dog Molly out to enjoy the fresh air. Wimbledon Common, a vast green space, nearly 4 square kilometers in size, tends to get quite busy during the summer holidays, which is why Rachel preferred to go in the morning, it being a beautifully sunny day. Filled with flowers and lush greenery, Molly and Alexander was playing in the grass. Unfortunately, what started as a lovely summer outing with his mother and pet quickly turned into a traumatic experience. Alexander recalled that suddenly, a man jumped out of the bushes. With a sling thrown over his shoulder and a large black bag, the man pulled out a knife and approached them, pushing Alexander to the ground. Moments later, Rachel fell down beside the boy. The park gradually became crowded, but mother and son were not seen until about 10:30 a.m. A passerby noticed Alexander crying as he clung to Rachel, who was lying on the ground. "Mom, wake up. Why won't you wake up?" At this time, Rachel's clothes were dirty. Adding to the tragic scene, a paper receipt rested on her forehead, which Alexander had placed there the day before. His mother had told him about bandages, and he thought that with this plaster, his mother get better? The details of what happened shocked even seasoned detectives. By the stream, Rachel had been stabbed 49 times in the neck and body. Besides, she had also been abused. The attacker only harmed Rachel. Her son, Alexander, and their dog, Molly, were unharmed. It was hard to comprehend that such a horrific crime could occur in broad daylight in a busy area. Initially, the police suspected that the perpetrator knew Rachel and had planned the attack, but it soon became clear that this was not the case. Rachel typically visited the park at a different time. After examining the area, law enforcement officers could not identify any suspects. She lived a quiet life focused on motherhood. Previously, she had been a model, and although she hadn't walked the runway in about 3 years, her beauty still attracted attention from men. It's possible that Rachel had a secret admirer who felt spurned and sought revenge. Upon investigating the crime scene, the police discovered that the only evidence left by the perpetrator was his male reproductive cell. Experts managed to create a genetic profile of the suspect, but in the early 90s, the DNA database was nearly empty and no matches were found. During their investigation, the police canvassed the park for witnesses, interviewing around 500 people who had been there on July 15 between 9 and 11 a.m. But only one person provided significant information. A witness reported seeing a man around 9:30 a.m. who was washing his hands in a stream and then wiping his jacket. This man was carrying a black bag over his shoulder and which stood out to Alexander. Based on this description, the police created a composite sketch of a young man with short brown hair, approximately 180 meters tall. Although the man's behavior was suspicious, there was no solid evidence linking him to the crime. The only actual witness to the tragedy was Alexander, who was only 2 years old at the time and unable to provide any helpful information to the police following the highly publicized murder in the park. Journalists became increasingly interested in Alexander. Even trying to interview him at the playground, Andre had a strong alibi. He was at work during the incident. After the tragedy, Andre chose to leave the country, taking his son to live in Spain. After several months of investigation, detectives began to narrow their focus. 32 men were questioned in connection with the murder. The investigation quickly focused on Colin Stagg, a man from Roehampton who was known to walk his dog on the common. However, Colin Stagg came back into focus for the police when they discovered he had previously been fined £200 for being found naked in a park, although there was no physical evidence connecting Colin to the Rachel case. The police concentrated their efforts on him. They even sought the expertise of renowned criminal psychologist Paul Britton to create a psychological profile of the potential killer. Britton's report suggested that the attacker likely chose the victim at random while hiding in the bushes near the path, implying that he might not have known her beforehand. The profile indicated that the attacker was probably between 20 and 35 years old, shy, and had difficulty interacting with people, especially women. It was suggested that he likely did not have a wife or girlfriend who could satisfy his unusual fantasies, leading to feelings of distress that may have driven him to commit crimes. When the police compared this psychological profile with Colin, they found several matching traits, such as a similar age and the fact that he was a loner who lived close to the park and walked his dog there twice a day. However, this information was merely circumstantial, and the police needed more concrete evidence to proceed with an arrest. To gather evidence, detectives brought Colin in for questioning. During their discussion, Colin admitted he had met Rachel in the park, noting he remembered her because he found her attractive. He also mentioned that he had never been in a serious relationship, which troubled him. However, the police did not have enough evidence to charge him, so they devised a plan to trap him. They created an operation called Edsel, with an undercover officer named Lizzie James at the center of it. Her goal was to build a relationship with Colin, making him lower his guard, and hopefully he confessed to the crime involving Rachel. To achieve this, Lizzie frequently consulted a criminal psychologist for advice on how to connect with Colin. She developed a relationship with him, going on dates, talking on the phone, and writing letters together. Lizzie told Colin that she liked the occult and unusual experiments. At one point, she directly asked Colin if he wanted to explore some of his fantasies. He responded affirmatively and shared disturbing from violent thoughts. Despite her repeated attempts to get him to talk about the crime in the park, he remained silent in a private conversation. She suggested she would be willing to sleep with him if he confessed to what he did to Rachel. Colin replied, "I'm really sorry, but I didn't do it. I didn't harm Rachel in any way." Despite his firm denial and the absence of solid evidence, Colin was arrested in 1993. The police had recordings of phone conversations in which Colin admitted to Lizzie that he enjoyed hurting others. Additionally, during discussions with Lizzie about the incident in the park, he described specific details about the creek where Rachel was murdered, which details that only the actual perpetrator would know. The trial commenced in September 1994. In response to the unfounded allegations, Colin went on a hunger strike, leading to significant weight loss and a visibly exhausted appearance during the proceedings. In court, Colin stated, "Most of what I shared with Lizzie is not true. I invented much of it because I liked her and didn't want to let down the only woman I thought cared about me. I'm not interested in violence, and I have never done anything remotely like that. I'm certainly not capable of what happened to Rachel." After listening to both the prosecution and the defense, the judge determined that the police had been overly reckless in trying to obtain a confession through inappropriate investigative methods. The judge concluded that Colin was not involved in the Rachel tragedy and ordered his immediate release in the courtroom. Every year, on the anniversary of the murders, Scotland Yard faces pressure to advance the investigation. In the late 1990s, the Rachel murder was reinvestigated as part of Operation Enigma, which was a nationwide multi-agency investigation into the unsolved murders of 207 women. Under new management, detectives began to collect evidence and files related to the case starting in 2000. In 2006, officers located Robert Napa, who was 40 years old at the time and had serious diagnoses of paranoid schizophrenia and autism spectrum disorder. In November 1993, he was convicted of murdering a young woman named Samantha Bissett and her 4-year-old daughter, Jasmine. He had been held in a secure facility for over 10 years. Robert carefully observed Samantha's movements and poses. One night, he waited for the right moment and entered her home through the balcony door, which was usually left open. Ultimately, Robert positioned Samantha on the bed in a way that reflected how she often appeared during intimate moments with her partner. When the officers examined the crime scenes, they frequently required breaks and assistance from a psychologist, as they had never faced such brutality before. This tragedy occurred 16 months after the attack on model Rachel. Robert was born in 1966 in London. His father was a driving instructor, and his mother worked as a nursing home assistant. The parents often fought, and these arguments took place in front of the children. Robert had 2 younger brothers and a sister. When Robert was 9, his father left the family for Australia, where he became a fireman. Robert struggled with his parents' divorce. He wrote letters to his father, but over time, their connection faded. The father remembered Robert as a sweet child and believed he would not engage in terrible actions in the future. At school, Robert rarely made friends. He was often isolated, secretive, and aspired to be an astronomer. Classmates described him as living in his own world. His mother noted that Robert frequently hid behind doors to eavesdrop on her conversations with relatives. Afterward, he would confront them, accusing them of making up stories about him. He often lied and fought with his brothers. Additionally, Robert liked to spy on his sister when she was in the shower or when she was just changing clothes in the room. Sometimes, he would throw her back in bed. His mother noticed that her son was behaving strangely and that he had problems with his mental health issues. When Robert turned 11, his mother sent him for a psychiatric examination. after his first therapy session. Robert came home smiling, and the psychiatrist said he thought Robert mentally unwell. He was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome and began receiving the appropriate treatment. A year later, at age 12, Robert was attacked while walking with two younger boys. A stranger approached and forced them into a disturbing situation, which was traumatic for the group. This incident occurred in a park close to Robert's home. Psychologists believe this was the turning point that led to Robert's troubling behavior. His teacher noted that, after the incident, Robert underwent a dramatic change. It was as if he had shut down emotionally. Becoming like a soulless robot, he stopped expressing emotions and responding. He simply sat at his desk, completed his work, and went home. During a literature lesson, the students listened to a recording of a Victorian-era short story about a murder. As they listened, Robert turned pale, began to shake, and sweat formed on his forehead. The teacher initially thought he was having a seizure, but soon everything passed. Sometime later, Robert stole money from his uncle. His mother went to the police and requested that her son be taken to the station, fingerprinted, and treated like a criminal. She hoped this would scare him into changing his ways, but it didn't work. People around him saw him as a nice, normal guy, but at home, he was completely different. Robert had average intelligence and disliked physical work. At 16, he dropped out of school, took courses in catering, and started working as a laborer. He frequently changed jobs and often went months without work, spending time alone in his room. When his mother remarried, Robert immediately disliked his stepfather and refused to speak to him. By the time he turned 18, his behavior had become so troubling that his mother told him he had to leave her house. After that, she did not see him for 5 years. They finally reunited when Robert was living in a rundown room in South London. He told his mother that, 2 months earlier, he had forced a girl into an intimate situation in the park. She was unsure if he was being serious or joking. She contacted a psychiatrist and reported the incident to the police. However, the officers investigated and found no record of anyone reporting an attack in the city park. Surprisingly, they did not even question Robert. They never met or spoke with him. Robert began showing signs of paranoid schizophrenia around the age of 20, which took over his mind. He believed he was a brilliant mathematician who had won a Nobel Prize, had immense power, a multi-million-dollar fortune, and could communicate through telepathy. Robert was convinced that he had not been touched. Robert's first known victim was a 31-year-old woman, a young mother sunbathing in her garden in 1989. After attacking her, he warned, "If you want advice, don't leave the back door open." Over the next 2 years, Robert established a clear pattern of crimes. He typically targeted secluded areas in the park. His victims were usually young, attractive women, often with blonde hair. Notably, Robert committed several attacks in the same locations where he himself had been assaulted at age 12 between 1989 and 1993. He is believed to have attacked at least 11 women. Robert was short, but in great physical shape. He often carried a knife and rope, though he didn't always use them, and kept a weapon at home. As he committed more attacks, he became increasingly cruel to his victims. After he murdered Samantha and Jasmine, he left a fingerprint at their home, which helped detectives identify the killer as Robert Napper. A storekeeper at the time, Robert was arrested a year later. In May 1994, he was convicted but not sent to prison. Instead, he was sent to a maximum security psychiatric hospital, Broadmoor. Detectives investigating Rachel's case had considered Robert a suspect for some time. On 18 December 2008, at the Old Bailey, Robert pleaded guilty to the manslaughter of Rachel Nichol on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Judge Griffith Williams said Robert would be detained indefinitely at Broadmoor because he was a very dangerous man. There was no prospect of his release. At one point, Andre considered returning to England, but ultimately chose to stay in Spain. Years later, Andre got married, so Alexander got a stepmother and 2 sisters. With the support of his father, and family. Alexander successfully found his path in life. Alexander vividly remembers the unfortunate day in a London park. In order to cope with them, he became interested in meditation and eventually became a yoga trainer. He also wrote a book about his mother and his life, according to him. It helped him finally accept his memories and forgive Robert Napper, Colin's stag, who was wrongfully accused of murdering Rachel, demanded compensation for moral damages, and won the case, receiving as compensation £700. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Norberto Ronquillo. In 2019, Norberto Ronquillo, a 22-year-old Mexican student, was kidnapped by unidentified men shortly after leaving college. He had just completed his final semester before graduating. Norberto lived with his uncles in southern Mexico City, just a 15-minute walk from Pedregal University, on the evening of July 4. He left the university at 9 p.m. and texted his girlfriend to say he was coming home. A security camera recorded him leaving the building at around 9:30 p.m., but he disappeared afterward. The case attracted widespread attention in Mexico, and finding those responsible should have been easy. However, the mastermind managed to confuse the investigation, creating a bizarre story that captured the attention of many. Norberto was born in Meoqui, Chihuahua. He was known for being very sociable and charming. He was always ready to help those in need and was well liked by many. Norberto's dream was to move to Mexico City to study marketing at Pedregal University after graduation. Upon arriving in the capital, he lived with his uncles, aunts, and cousins. By the age of 22, his life seemed to be in order. He was dating a girl. On July 4, 2019, Norberto left class at around 9:30 p.m. A surveillance camera recorded him leaving the university parking lot while calmly talking on the phone. Just 15 minutes after he left, his uncles and aunts received a call from his phone. But it was not Norberto on the other end of the line. Another voice informed them that their nephew was being held captive. The young uncle panicked and abruptly hung up. The kidnappers called back, but no one answered. Finally, Norberto's aunt picked up the phone and spoke to the criminals. Their message was clear: to see their nephew Norberto alive. His uncle's family needed to hand over 5 million pesos that night at 10 p.m. The police received a report of a gray Toyota Yaris abandoned in the middle of the road. This was the same model that Norberto owned when the police arrived. They failed to secure the area for potential evidence and did not call in forensic experts to conduct a thorough investigation. This mishandling complicated the case, especially since the car was parked near Norberto's uncle's house, with the keys left on the sidewalk. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo returned home, he saw the police nearby and informed them that the car belonged to his family. Unfortunately, the police carelessly returned the car to Osvaldo, who was unaware of the troubling events involving his family. At midnight, Osvaldo returned home and received shocking news. He quickly decided to take his father to the police to report the incident. 40 minutes later, the case was officially opened. Meanwhile, Norberto's aunt chose to handle things differently. At 1 a.m., she asked her husband and son to withdraw the complaint, claiming that she had made a deal with the kidnappers. She also negotiated the ransom down to 500 pesos and some jewelry. However, it was too late. The police had already begun their investigation. Meanwhile, the kidnappers made their demands. At 3:30 a.m., Osvaldo was ordered to pay the ransom for Norberto's safe return. They instructed Osvaldo to go to Las Bombas Street, stop at a car wash, collect the money, and throw it behind bars in an empty lot. Osvaldo carefully followed all the instructions. Then the kidnappers informed him that Norberto would be released at the Chalcocan Canal. Osvaldo waited there for hours, but Norberto never arrived. The kidnappers also stopped communicating, and there was no further contact. At 7 in the morning, Osvaldo decided to call the police, who quickly began searching for the missing person. On June 5 at 10 a.m., the Prosecutor General's office officially opened an investigation. Norberto's relatives were summoned to the Ministry of Defense to provide witness statements. Meanwhile, footage from city cameras was reviewed, but no useful information was found. Cameras that may have captured footage of Norberto's abandoned car were thoroughly examined. Unfortunately, they were pointed in the wrong direction. The only camera facing the right direction was broken. The family's desperation quickly spread throughout the country. On June 6th, Norberto did not return home, and news of his disappearance was widely reported. The university then helped raise awareness, leading to media coverage of the kidnapping. During his graduation ceremony, Norberto's classmates took the opportunity to rally support for the search. Dressed in caps and gowns, they displayed posters with Norberto's picture, which quickly attracted attention on social media. Norberto's mother traveled to the capital and appeared on several television shows. On June 8, a search was conducted in the areas where Norberto's car had been found. Unfortunately, this search did not uncover any new clues. The kidnappers did not contact anyone. As if they had disappeared, questions about Norberto's whereabouts continued to echo throughout the country for a long time. There was only silence, but that silence was finally broken. On June 9 at 6 p.m., the police received an anonymous tip about a body wrapped in a blanket that had been found in the Xochimilco area. The police quickly arrived at the reported location. The area was deserted, with no surveillance cameras, suggesting that the perpetrators had planned the crime carefully. The police sent the body for an autopsy. On June 10, Norberto's family came to identify the body. His family confirmed that the body found was Norberto. The autopsy revealed that he had died of exhaustion, and there were signs of torture on his body, including a broken nasal septum. As the investigation continued, the case became increasingly puzzling. Forensic experts reported that the body could have been there for 3 to 5 days, suggesting that Norberto may have died on the day he was kidnapped. Despite attempts to negotiate a ransom with the family, the criminals had no plans to release Norberto, however. These are still just theories, as many uncertainties surrounding the case remain. Norberto's body was cremated, and after the funeral, he was flown back to his hometown. The university suspended all academic activities for 3 days. The investigation into his death continues. Norberto's mother has used social media to call for justice and urge safety measures for all young people to prevent tragedies like her son's from happening again. The first to face consequences was the police, who ignored Norberto's car, a potential piece of evidence. Traces of blood were later found inside the car, but were never tested. When Norberto's cousin Osvaldo got into the car to take it to the garage, he accidentally contaminated potential evidence. However, Osvaldo did not know that Norberto was missing at the time and only learned about it when he got home. Since then, the car has not been mentioned again. The Attorney General's office has analyzed more than 20 hours of video from 6 cameras, including state and private cameras. Located near the scene of the incident, it appears that the criminals used 2 cars to carry out the kidnapping. It was revealed that one of the cars was used to distract attention from the criminals and only intervened if any problems arose. The second car was used specifically for the purpose of kidnapping Norberto. The information gathered led to a 2-part investigation. First, it was assumed that the kidnapping was carried out by a Mexican organized crime group known to the media as the Skinheads. This group targeted students from private universities and high schools within a 10-kilometer radius of Xochimilco. One similarity with Norberto's case is that the gang had previously carried out 5 kidnappings, 3 of which resulted in the victims being killed even after their families had paid ransoms. Furthermore, records show that these victims usually died within the first 48 hours of their capture. However, there are some notable characteristics of skinhead gangs. They shave the victim's head before releasing or killing them. In Norberto's case, his head was not shaved, and there was no evidence that he was being held captive. Negotiations between criminal groups and families are common in these types of crimes. Considering this, the police formed a second hypothesis. The crime could have been committed by someone close to the Norberto. They decided to question Norberto's acquaintances. The prosecutor general's office found it suspicious that the ransom was arranged so quickly, in just 20 minutes. And it was hard to believe that the criminals would agree to a discount for the family. It was also strange that Norberto's aunt refused to involve the police. Later, the police interviewed Norberto's girlfriend, aunt, uncle, cousins, and close friends. Finally, a breakthrough occurred. The police noticed that Euritzi's ex-boyfriend seemed to be interfering too much in Norberto and Euritzi's private lives. He often expressed dissatisfaction with their relationship, however. Euritzi and Norberto appeared to be a happy couple, regularly sharing photos of themselves together on social media. The day before Norberto went missing, his girlfriend Euritzi posted a tweet that appeared to be directed at her ex-boyfriend, urging him to stop interfering in her life and focus on his own. The Attorney General's office quickly launched an investigation into Euritzi's ex-boyfriend, but the investigation stalled when he could not be found. Finally, a crucial piece of evidence emerged that had previously been overlooked. The red plaid blanket that had been used to wrap Norberto's body had the name Hernandez embroidered on it, indicating that it belonged to a family with that surname. This raised suspicions about Norberto's maternal family. The Attorney General's office investigated 47 people with the surname Hernandez. Unfortunately, these investigations were fruitless and caused delays. Meanwhile, the most promising lead in the case came from surveillance cameras. When the police reviewed footage from a camera on Las Bombas Street, they saw a white van and a red sedan drive by at 3 a.m., shortly after Osvaldo delivered the ransom, with 3 people getting out of the vehicles. After receiving new information, the police were able to clarify some important details. They quickly identified the red sedan and its owner. This discovery led to several arrests. The first arrest was of Daniel, the owner of the red sedan. In his statement, Daniel explained that he used the car to transport passengers for a private company. He said that the person driving the car that night was actually his friend, Oscar. The police then went to Miguel Hidalgo to find Oscar. When Oscar was arrested, the police found packages containing illegal synthetic substances. They also learned that he had previously been involved in a criminal case. Based on information provided by Daniel and Oscar, the police arrested Jose Fernando, who was also found to have illegal substances. On July 7, more than a month after Norberto's death, the preliminary results of the investigation were released to the public, creating considerable interest. The police stated that one of the suspects was Daniel's cousin, but Daniel's father insisted that he had never heard of Norberto. This raised questions about how Daniel could have known Norberto and why he would plan to kill him. New evidence quickly emerged in the case to expedite the investigation. Oscar appeared in court a few days later and surprisingly confessed to being involved in the crime. They uncovered key details and identified a woman named Euritzi Martinez, Norberto's ex-lover, as the mastermind behind the crime. Euritzi met Norberto about 3 years ago, and they dated for a short time. Romantic photos and messages to her were found on Norberto's Facebook page, and his aunt confirmed their relationship. However, the motive behind Euritzi's involvement in the crime remains unclear. Euritzi asked for Norberto to be kidnapped because he owed her 700 pesos. They planned to demand 5 million pesos from his family after she received the money. The rest would be divided among the kidnappers. Eurydice claimed that Norberto's uncle and aunt owned shops in the central market, which would make it easier for them to collect the ransom. However, things quickly spiraled out of control, and Norberto was killed on the night of his kidnapping. The police promptly opened a case against Norberto's ex-girlfriend, Eurydice, until July 14. She was still active on social media after the arrest warrant for Eurydice was issued. She disappeared. She deleted her social media accounts and turned off her cell phone. A few days later, the investigation revealed that there was no debt between Norberto and Eurydice. It became clear that she only wanted to profit from Norberto's family. On July 28, 2019, Daniel and Oscar were arrested and taken into custody at a pre-trial detention facility. Initially, it seemed that the case was almost solved, with the only remaining task being to find Eurydice. However, during the investigation, the police discovered that Elvia, the owner of the house where Norberto had been held, was involved in the kidnapping. On September 21, Elvia was arrested for unlawful deprivation of liberty following her arrest. New details of the investigation emerged. It was revealed that Elvia was a witch and that the kidnappers had approached her to perform a ritual to assist in the kidnapping. Elvia had voluntarily joined the criminal group, motivated by the prospect of receiving a portion of the ransom. The final arrest in the case occurred on October 22. When the police apprehended Jose Fernando, they sought him for drug trafficking 3 days later. After being taken to prison, Jose was informed that he would also face charges for kidnapping Norberto. This indicated that the case was close to being resolved. However, the family could not achieve full justice because the main instigator, Eurydice Martinez, was still on the run. The Mexico City judiciary found Jose, Daniel, Elvia, and Oscar guilty of kidnapping and murdering Norberto Ronquillo. They were each sentenced to 140 years in prison and ordered to pay more than $1 million pesos in damages. 4 years after the case, Eurydice is still missing. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of April Millsap. What could happen to a young woman simply walking through a quiet suburban neighborhood that is considered one of the safest in America? Normally, there would be nothing to worry about, but when a real predator lurks in the shadows, even the safest places can become the scene of a horrific tragedy. April Millsap, 14 years old by the summer of 2014. She was living with her family in Armada, a small town in Michigan, USA. April was a friendly and sweet girl who attended a local high school. She was an only child, and her parents had divorced when she was 6. After the divorce, her mother began a relationship with another man, who later became April's stepfather. April quickly grew close to her stepfather, and they developed a warm bond. April was a cheerful girl with a sense of humor, always bringing joy to her family. Her positive attitude helped her form a close circle of friends. She was creative, loved drawing, stayed active, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Despite her young age, April seemed mature and independent. By the time she turned 14, she often walked her dog alone and enjoyed spending time with her friends while maintaining a close relationship with her family. April also had a boyfriend named Austin Schutt, who was a year older than her. They attended the same school and had been dating for about a year at the time of these events. In 2014, the town of Armada had a population of about 1.7 people. It was considered a safe and family-friendly place where everyone knew each other. However, as life sometimes proves, even the safest places can attract danger. Crimes in Armada were rare, but when they did occur, they caused significant alarm. On July 24, 2014, the summer holidays were in full swing. That day, April didn't have any plans to go out or meet friends. She slept until noon and spent most of the day on her computer, chatting with friends and playing games. Around 6 p.m., she decided to take her dog, Penny, for a walk April often brought Penny along when she met friends or her boyfriend, Austin. That evening, she chose one of her usual walking routes, which she often used to relax. Her walks typically lasted no more than an hour. Her mother, Jennifer, waited for her at home without concern, but when an hour and a half passed and April still hadn't returned, Jennifer became increasingly anxious when April didn't respond to her calls or text messages. So she reached out to April's boyfriend, assuming they might be together. However, Austin told her he hadn't seen April all day and had only communicated with her online. Jennifer's worry deepened, and she began contacting April's friends and classmates, but no one knew where April could be. About half an hour later, there was a knock at the door, hoping it was April returning from her walk. Jennifer felt a brief sense of relief. Instead, she found Austin and his friends standing on the doorstep. They had come to check on April because they were also concerned. Austin then showed Jennifer a message he had received from April at 6:28 p.m., roughly 40 minutes after she had left the house to walk the dog. Although Austin initially said he hadn't heard from her, he admitted to seeing the message later, either because he hadn't noticed it right away or he had been out of network coverage at the time. The message contained a chilling statement: "They tried to kidnap me." Alarmed by this, Austin had immediately started searching for her, realizing the seriousness of the situation. Jennifer called her husband, who at work, alarmed. He left his job immediately to join the search. He joined Jennifer and Austin, and the three decided to split up to cover more ground along the routes April usually walked. Jennifer also contacted the police, who promptly joined the efforts to find April. Shortly afterward, April was found. A man and a woman jogging along one of the trails came across a dog on a leash. Penny, the dog, seemed extremely agitated when the woman attempted to grab the leash. Penny ran off, but stopped periodically. As if trying to guide them somewhere, they followed Penny into a dense thicket, where they discovered the body of a girl. The victim was later identified as 14-year-old April Millsap by the time her family arrived. Forensic experts were already working at the site. In Armada, the local police force consisted of only 2 officers, neither of whom was trained for cases of this nature. Serious crimes were almost unheard of in the area, and the small force was sufficient for handling minor issues like petty theft. However, this case was different. None of the local officers had ever dealt with a violent murder, and their investigative resources were minimal. The sheriff immediately reached out to more capable authorities at the county level. Law enforcement from other regions was quickly brought in to assist with the investigation. As they had more resources and experience, April was discovered lying on her back at the bottom of a ravine. Her shoes had been removed and were found a few meters away. Her clothing and underwear had been pulled off, suggesting a clear abuse motive. However, further investigation revealed that she had not been abused. Detectives theorized that the attacker may have attempted but failed, possibly because April fought back fiercely or because something like a passerby or the dog interrupted the assault. Regardless, she was subjected to a brutal beating. Her body was covered in bruises, ranging from defensive wounds to severe injuries on her face, which was so disfigured it appeared almost crushed. The forensic examination identified at least 48 separate injuries, many concentrated on her face and neck. Her body was covered in dried blood. There were signs of compression on her neck, but they didn't match the typical patterns seen in manual strangulation or the use of an object. Instead, the injuries on her face and neck bore unusual marks, which forensic analysis confirmed were caused by the tread of a shoe. This indicated that the attacker had stomped on her repeatedly. The forensic report concluded that April's death was the result of being trampled. Marks resembling the sole of a large sneaker were found on her head and neck. Considering the level of violence and the potential motive, investigators believed the perpetrator was likely a large man. The forensic expert concluded that the attack lasted over 10 minutes, during which the girl endured immense agony before dying. Identifying the victim initially proved difficult due to the severe facial injuries, which rendered her unrecognizable. Similarly, her mother was already unidentifiable from the start. The girl's stepmother, boyfriend, and the boyfriend's friend were brought in for police questioning to narrow down the list of possible suspects. The initial investigation focused on her mother, Jennifer, to determine if there were any events or threats that could be related to the case. However, investigators quickly determined that Jennifer had no conflicts, troubles, or unusual events related to her daughter's death. After ruling this possibility out, they turned their attention to April's boyfriend, Austin. To continue to clarify the details of the case, suspicion arose when Austin admitted that his relationship with the victim had been strained recently. They argued often and were on the brink of breaking up shortly before the murder. They had a heated argument. Adding to investigators' doubts was a chilling message April had sent to Austin just before the crime. She told him that someone had attempted to kidnap her, but he chose to ignore this alarming warning. Austin claimed he couldn't respond because the message arrived too late for him to see it. It seems there was a delay in delivery. Detectives noted that after receiving the message, he reacted very slowly, did not inform the police, and instead decided to search for her on his own. Austin explained that he was still upset with his girlfriend and believed the message was an attempt to manipulate him. He thought she was trying to provoke his attention and concern, to push him toward reconciliation, not realizing the gravity of the situation regarding the quarrel. Austin insisted that April's behavior was incomprehensible. The most recent conflict had seemingly come out of nowhere, and he couldn't clearly explain the reasons behind their disagreements. Instead, he placed the blame on her. This only deepened the detective's suspicions, as it suggested Austin might have had a motive for the attack. In many cases, such incidents are committed by partners. As a result, the officers decided to detain him longer and asked him to tell them how his day went in all the details in order to analyze his movements and establish an alibi. Austin said that around 4 p.m., he met a friend to help carry a TV into a house. Afterward, they went to the nearest McDonald's for a snack. His account was later confirmed by surveillance camera footage from the cafe, which showed him there at the specified time, around 6:30 p.m. Just a few minutes after the message about the attempted kidnapping was sent, it became clear that Austin could not have been involved in the murder, since Austin was ruled out as the killer. Investigators turned their attention to the victim's mobile phone, hoping it might provide crucial information. They suspected April might have received a message from the stalker pursuing her, but her mobile phone could not be found at the crime scene. Detectives theorized that the killer had taken it, turned it off to prevent tracking, and discarded it elsewhere to find the phone and other evidence. A thorough search was conducted along the route April was believed to have taken, but no clues were initially found. Law enforcement, specialized dogs, and the FBI joined the search effort after nearly a full day of searching with no results. A breakthrough occurred the next day. The girl's mobile phone was discovered about a kilometer from the crime scene and was immediately sent to a forensic lab for analysis around the same time. News of the brutal attack spread widely through local newspapers and TV channels. Authorities appealed for witnesses who might have noticed anything unusual on the trail near the time of the crime. However, in the early stages, this only heightened public fear and anxiety. What shocked people most was the sheer brutality of the attack and the fact that it occurred in broad daylight, leaving everyone feeling unsafe. Then, a girl came forward to the police with potentially valuable information. She explained that around 6 p.m. on the day April was killed, she was at home looking out her window when she noticed a white van she had never seen before passing by. A man was driving, with another young man in the passenger seat. The van was moving very slowly, as if the occupants were searching for something or someone. This struck her as odd. When they noticed her watching from the window, they stopped and stared at her, even pointing toward her house. The encounter made her feel uneasy. Afterward, they drove away. Upon hearing about April's murder, The girl became worried that these two men might have been involved. She feared they could have spotted April as a target and attacked her. Detectives found this information reliable and important to the investigation. They considered it plausible that a white van had been driving around the area looking for a victim, and April was unfortunate enough to catch the men's attention. The police appealed to the public once again, sharing a description of the white van and a composite sketch of the two men inside, hoping to gather more reliable leads. The following day, a man and his friend contacted the police. They admitted to driving a van in the area that evening. They explained that they were construction workers and had been driving slowly through the neighborhood because the driver wanted to show his colleague some houses where he had previously worked. One of these houses happened to be where the girl lived. Their account was verified, and local residents confirmed their story. Clearing them of suspicion, the men were eager to assist the investigation in any way they could. The day after the incident, several people contacted the police to report a suspicious motorcycle and its driver. Witnesses reported seeing a schoolgirl walking her dog along a path around 6:30 p.m. They noted that she wasn't alone at the time. She was accompanied by an older man who was pushing his motorcycle by hand. The two appeared to be walking and talking casually at the time. The witnesses assumed the man was her father, as his behavior seemed calm and April showed no signs of fear. However, upon reflecting on the situation later, doubts about the man began to emerge. None of April's friends or family recognized him based on the description provided, suggesting he was a complete stranger to her, according to witnesses. This encounter occurred around the same time April had texted her boyfriend about an attempted kidnapping, raising further suspicions about the man, since there were very few motorcyclists in town. The man and his unusual motorcycle quickly caught the attention of locals. The motorcycle was described as having a rare blue and white color scheme, making it easy to identify thanks to this detailed description. Police located a motorcycle matching it just 3 days after April's murder, on April 27, 2014. It was found parked in the driveway of a local house. When officers arrived, the motorcycle was still there. The officers approached a man working in the garden, who told them the motorcycle did not belong to him. Instead, it belonged to his 32-year-old friend, James Donald Van Callis, who lived in the neighboring town. About 30 kilometers from Armada, this information was verified. On April 28, officers met with James, the owner of the motorcycle, to question him about his whereabouts on the day April was killed. From the start, James was cooperative and willing to answer all questions. He claimed he had been at a friend's house in Armada during that time, and his friend confirmed the alibi. However, authorities found the alibi unreliable, as the witness was a friend who might have been covering for him. Additionally, there were minor discrepancies in the timeline. When asked about the shoes he wore that day, James provided a pair of white sneakers. However, the tread on the shoes did not match the marks found on the victim's body. Detectives decided to take a closer look at James to eliminate him as a potential suspect. While he had a criminal record, it was not for violent offenses. His convictions included breaking, as well as failing to pay child support, and the robberies occurring in 2005 and 2006. However, upon reviewing James's background, the police uncovered something far more alarming. His father, James Bernard Van Callis, was a registered abuse offender. The elder James Bernard had been convicted of abusing a 13-year-old minor at the time. Both men lived in the same family home. Authorities considered the possibility that James Bernard and James Donald might be involved in criminal activities. However, the investigation primarily focused on the son, as witnesses had identified a middle-aged man matching the witness's description. Searches of their home revealed that James Bernard and James Donald were growing the territory of the prohibited plant. The quantity was so large that they were arrested and charged with distributing the prohibited banned substance. This allowed law enforcement to detain them, ensuring public safety and preventing the suspects from fleeing the state. While the investigation continued, the police thoroughly inspected all the shoes found in the men's house, but none matched the tread marks found on the victim's body. Additionally, numerous DNA tests were conducted on the clothing, but no traces linked to April were discovered. However, forensic experts who examined the motorcycle were confident that James Donald had used strong cleaning agents shortly before it was seized by the police for analysis. They suspected this was an attempt to remove evidence. James Donald was quite successful. As the police no traces were found, the detectives quickly confirmed their theory. When James Donald's girlfriend contacted the police, she reported that on the day of the murder, in April, she came home to find he meticulously cleaning his shoes, motorcycle, and helmet with strong disinfectants. This unusual behavior made her suspicious. The injuries on the victim's head were consistent with marks that could have been caused by a helmet, leading investigators to believe James Donald might have used it during the assault. She also revealed that he had traveled by car that day to a nearby town where the victim lived. Supposedly to visit his friend, James Donald's girlfriend described a pair of black and white sneakers that James Donald frequently wore and loved. However, these shoes did not match the ones he handed over to detectives when they questioned him. After that night, she never saw those sneakers again, leading her to believe James Donald had disposed of them. Fearing he couldn't fully clean away the evidence, she further detailed her troubling relationship with James Donald, describing him as extremely abusive and controlling. Recently, she had felt more like his hostage or property than his girlfriend. He tightly controlled every aspect of her life, even forbidding her from leaving the house unless he accompanied her. She suspected him from the start, but feared he would kill her if she contacted the police. Now that James Bernard and James Donald had been arrested, she could finally speak freely. According to James Donald's own admission to his girlfriend, he claimed he was cleaning his belongings because they had been stained with machine oil while fixing his motorbike. However, she remained unconvinced. The police needed to confirm that the sneakers she described matched the ones James Donald commonly wore. They found photos on his social media page showing him wearing sneakers identical to her description, although James Donald had disposed of the pair he wore during the murder. The police located and purchased the same model when they compared the tread pattern to the marks on the victim's body. Forensic experts found an exact match. The investigation revealed that April had been trampled to death with shoes James Donald had purchased about a year before the attack. Further evidence was found on his computer, where investigators uncovered his disturbing interest in much younger girls. Additionally, crucial information came from April's phone using FBI lab analysis. It was discovered that she had a fitness app installed, which monitored her movements, steps, and heart rate, among other data. Shortly after sending a worrying message to her boyfriend, Austin, the data showed she suddenly began running, as if trying to escape from someone. James Donald reportedly approached the girl on his motorcycle and offered her something. Shortly afterward, she sent her boyfriend a message about an attempted kidnapping. Then she ran really fast to escape her pursuer. Minutes later, her fitness app recorded a sudden, chaotic, and extremely fast increase in her movements, lasting 10 to 15 minutes. This appears to have been the moment she fought for her life. Later, the criminal returned to his vehicle with the April's phone. The app recorded a steady speed of about 20 kilometers per hour, which continued until the phone was discarded about a kilometer from the attack site. Surveillance cameras along the biker's route captured footage of the motorcycle and identified the suspect as 32-year-old James Donald. Additionally, geolocation data from his mobile phone confirmed that, at the time of the attack, he was not with a friend, as he claimed, but near the crime scene. By this point, everyone was certain of his involvement in the murder. There was enough evidence to charge him with April's murder and proceed to court. However, a significant challenge remained: the lack of direct evidence. The police were unable to find any DNA linking James Donald to the victim. Of course, against this background, lawyers could effectively refer to indirectly provided evidence. Forensic experts were unable to find traces of the victim's blood on his belongings, equipment, or helmet. James Donald had meticulously cleaned everything and disposed of all incriminating items. It was clear that the man was highly experienced in this case. The prosecutor's office decided to proceed with the charges despite relying on indirect evidence. These evidences was enough to convince the jury of James Donald's guilt in October 2014. 3 months after the crime, James was formally charged, and the trial was scheduled for early 2016. It was believed that he attacked a teenage girl. April, after she rejected his advances, James Donald had spent considerable time online researching ways to attract much younger girls, particularly minors, but none of the advice seemed to work. Tragically, when April refused him, he reacted violently and attacked her. The defense argued that the prosecution lacked definitive proof of James's guilt and claimed the case was built entirely on circumstantial evidence, although James maintained his innocence. His arguments were unconvincing. As a last resort, his lawyer emphasized that James Donald had no prior record of serious crimes. However, this was not enough to sway the jury. After several hours of deliberation, the jury unanimously found him guilty of attempted kidnapping, abuse, and first-degree murder. James Donald Van Callis was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing, April's mother spoke extensively. She expressed her satisfaction with the court's decision, relieved that the perpetrator would never be released. She was horrified that her child's life had been taken by an adult man simply because his advances were rejected. His actions and intentions were criminal from the start, but the level of cruelty he displayed was unimaginable. Despite this, James refused to admit his guilt or show any remorse. He continued to claim his innocence. Even after his conviction, he attempted to overturn the court's decision by filing an appeal with his lawyer, but it was unsuccessful. Now, he remains in prison for committing a heinous crime against an innocent young girl, April Millsap, in April's memory. A memorial garden was created near the spot where her life was tragically taken. A small statue of her dog, Penny, stands in the garden to honor the pet who led strangers to the scene of the crime. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of David Katz. The Katz family lived in Baltimore, Maryland, and were relatively well off. Richard Katz and Elizabeth were highly educated professionals. Richard worked as an engineer at NASA, designing space technology, while Elizabeth worked in pharmacology. Together, they raised 2 sons, Brandon and David, in the early years of their marriage. The family enjoyed a happy and loving environment, but as time went on, the boys grew and everything started to change. In 2006, Richard and Elizabeth decided to separate. David Katz struggled with severe mental health issues from a young age. Between the ages of 9 and 12, he visited numerous psychiatrists who prescribed him strong medications, including antidepressants and antipsychotics. His parents' disagreement over how to manage his condition was a major factor in their decision to separate. Brandon and David faced significant challenges during this difficult period in their lives. His classmates described David as shy, quiet, and antisocial. David kept to himself, rarely made friends, and preferred solitude. He was also deeply passionate about video games, spending most of his free time in his room playing Madden NFL, a sports simulation game. Madden NFL, named after coach and sports commentator John Madden, is a popular series of American football video games. With a new edition released annually, David graduated from Hammond High School in 2011. He enrolled at the University of Maryland to study environmental science. However, he showed little interest in his studies or pursuing a career. Instead, he became increasingly absorbed in the virtual world. Dedicating almost all his time to gaming, David's commitment to his hobby paid off. As he developed exceptional skills in playing Madden NFL over the years. In June 2017, David Katz competed in a professional gaming tournament for the first time, using the nickname Bread. He entered the Madden Championship and won the title. Initially as the 7 seed, David was seen as an underdog. However, he surprised everyone with his skills, defeating his opponents and earning recognition. In an interview, he confidently stated, "I don't consider myself the 7th seed. I consider myself the best player. And I like that I was able to prove that." Fellow players congratulated him on his victory and wished him success in future competitions. David was ecstatic about his win and felt on top of the world, also taking home a $10 cash prize. He continued to enter several other tournaments, but did not achieve similar success despite the loss. He remained undeterred. He built a career in the gaming world, earning an income and establishing a strong reputation in the community. Today, many gamers look up to him as an inspiration for pursuing a career in gaming. David's online popularity grew, but things were not as bright for him in real life. David was born in 1993, and his childhood was marked by challenges. Over the first 16 years of his life, 26 calls were made to the police from the Katz family home, mainly due to domestic disputes and conflicts. Despite the medications, his condition showed little improvement. 2 years later, in 2007, he was hospitalized at Shepherd Pratt Psychiatric Hospital. During his stay, doctors increased the dosage of his antidepressants. That year, David was treated at 4 different psychiatric hospitals. By this time, David's parents were divorced, and he was alternating between living at his mother's and father's homes, along with his older brother, Brandon. However, David spent most of his time with his mother. He confided in close friends that he hated living with her and wished he could live with his father. However, according to custody court documents, this was not permitted. Elizabeth twice packed David's belongings into a suitcase and forced him to leave the house. One of these incidents occurred on Mother's Day in 2007. That same year, he was enrolled in a treatment program for troubled teens. Spending several months in the wilderness, Elizabeth admitted him to the program without seeking approval from her ex-husband. 2 years later, on December 22, 2009, David wrote a letter to the judge while his parents' custody battle was still ongoing. In the letter, he expressed his feelings. "Dear Judge, today is my 16th birthday. I live with my mom, but I've wanted to live with my dad for a long time. My mom has called the police about 20 times over minor issues, like me being a little late getting home. She also drinks and yells at me, poking me with her finger and refusing to leave me alone. In the past, she used to hit me. She takes my belongings just because she feels like it and has sent me to psychiatric hospitals twice for no real reason. I can't talk to her because I see her more than anyone else, and she'll most likely just yell at me again. She lies all the time." When David became an adult, his medical visits significantly decreased, though the reason for this remains unclear. However, it is known that he continued to struggle with mental health issues. He rarely bathed, sometimes going weeks without washing, and often spent entire days playing video games, especially his favorite, Madden NFL. He would stay up until 4 a.m. and frequently paced in circles around the house. David was diagnosed with dysthymia, a chronic mood disorder characterized by low energy and a persistent, mild depressive state. Unlike major depression, dysthymia lasts much longer. People with this condition often mistake their symptoms as part of their personality, and only a qualified specialist can provide an accurate diagnosis. In addition to dysthymia, David was also diagnosed with oppositional defiant disorder, a condition defined by frequent anger, irritability, and defiance toward authority figures. For David, these authority figures were his parents. Over time, David became increasingly detached from reality. He spent almost all his time online and rarely interacted with people face to face. While he was recognized as a talented Madden player, other gamers found him socially awkward and withdrawn at tournaments. He often made blunt, insulting remarks, avoided eye contact, and showed little to no emotion. David refused to engage with other players, did not seek friendships, and declined to shake hands with opponents. Regardless of whether he won or lost, David was always considered an unusual person, but no one ever felt uncomfortable around him. That all suddenly changed in the summer of 2018. Good Luck, Have Fun Game Bar, an arcade venue at the Jacksonville Landing Indoor Market, hosted a Madden NFL 19 video game tournament on August 26, 2018, with approximately 130 to 150 participants and spectators in attendance. At around 1 p.m., David was eliminated from the tournament after losing to his main competitor, Elijah Clayton. David was visibly upset after the loss and refused to shake Elijah's hand. His frustration stemmed not only from the defeat, but also from a contentious history between the two. Elijah had frequently mocked David for his social awkwardness before the tournament. David had written a guide to help players improve their Madden skills, but Elijah shared it online without permission, depriving David of the opportunity to monetize his work. They had also had a tense incident earlier at another tournament when they both called a taxi to the airport. When the car arrived, Elijah quickly got in, closed the door in David's face, and left alone. Back to the event on August 26. After losing to his longtime rival Elijah, David left the game bar and went to a nearby pizzeria. While there, he removed his sunglasses, placed them on the edge of a table, abruptly stood up, and left at 1:30 p.m. David returned to the event. Where the tournament was still ongoing, he pulled a weapon from his backpack and dropped the backpack on the floor. None of the gamers present realized the tragedy that was about to unfold, and the entire event was being streamed live on social platforms. David aimed his weapon directly at Elijah at that moment. The live stream camera briefly focused on Elijah, showing a red laser dot from David's weapon sight on his chest. Seconds later, as the camera switched back to the game, David attacked him. Elijah was struck by 3 bullets, one in the chest, one in the forehead, and one in the right eye. He died instantly. Still seated in his chair after killing Elijah, David began attacking others in the game bar. The attack lasted about 20 seconds before David turned the weapon on himself and ended his own life. By 1:35 p.m., the first responders, a fire brigade conducting training exercises near the game bar, arrived at the scene of the tragedy and provided aid to the victims. In total, David Katz injured 12 people. 2 of them, along with David, died, while the remaining 10 suffered non-fatal injuries. The victims who were killed were Elijah Clayton and Taylor Robertson, who was attacked in the back as he tried to flee from the game bar. Elijah Clayton, 22 years old, known in the gaming community by the nickname True Boy. From Woodland Hills, California, he was a high school graduate, played football, and had a passion for video games. Initially, Elijah had not planned to attend the Madden NFL 19 championship, but changed his mind at the last minute and decided to participate. Taylor Robertson, 27 years old, from Ballard, West Virginia, is a professional gamer known by the nickname Spot Me Please outside of gaming. He worked as an accountant and credit analyst at a major bank and had a family. During the investigation, police discovered that David had severe mental health issues. Detectives initially believed his motive was rage over losing to a rival. However, it was later revealed that David had been planning the crime 2 weeks before the tournament. He legally purchased 2 firearms equipped with high-precision sights in his home state of Maryland. David stored the firearms in his car and brought them to the tournament. He carried a weapon on his belt, which he never used, and kept another weapon in his backpack, which he used to kill 2 gamers before taking his own life. Police were puzzled by how David was able to purchase the weapons so easily, as this appeared to be a clear violation by the firearm seller. Soon, details about David Katz's troubled life came to light. It was revealed that he had been prescribed strong antidepressants and antipsychotic medications from an early age and had been treated in psychiatric hospitals multiple times. This was likely a significant factor in the case. David was far younger than recommended when he started using these drugs, sadly. Before the tragedy happened, no one could have predicted that this quiet, introverted young man could act so coldly. Perhaps the tragedy could have been prevented if the game bar had security measures like metal detectors in place. This might have stopped David from bringing weapons to the tournament so easily following the Jacksonville attack. Numerous lawsuits were filed against the organizers of the Madden NFL 19 event, the game bar owner, the pizzeria, and the seller who sold David Katz 2 weapons. All parties were held accountable.